Chapter 1334. They thought they could finally be at ease. Who knew that their lord was such a worrisome person? Hanyu said, "Are we short of 5,000 soldiers and horses? Why don't we bring more?" If it were not forbidden, Hanyu really wanted to bring all the troops to ensure his lord's safety. Jiang Pingji said, "Why do we need so many people? If 5,000 soldiers can't take down Bogeo, why should I keep them and waste our food? If 5,000 light and heavy cavalry soldiers could not take down the defeated soldiers who had lost their morale, and were like stray dogs," Jiang Pingji really wanted to scold them as useless snacks. Although her words were harsh, no one could refute what Jiang Pingji said, because she had the right to say so. "Nongqin, let's go." Jiang Pingji waved her horsewhip. Little White took the lead and rushed out. Jiang Nongqin rode her horse, and followed closely behind. 5,000 light and heavy cavalry soldiers followed. Looking at his lord's back, Yang Si almost suffocated. He raised his hand, and kept rubbing his left chest. With such a lord, his life would be shortened. Han Yu's face darkened. He caught a glimpse of Yang Si's action and asked, "What's wrong with you? Why didn't I know you were ill?" Yang Si said, "Since I followed such a lord, I'm worried that I'll fall ill." Han Yu was strangely silent for a few seconds. He could understand what Yang Si meant, and felt the same way. Without comparison, there would be no harm. He thought of his former lord Su Bei. Although he was not as versatile as his lord, at least he was less worrisome. The two of them did not have time to chat. Although Huang Song's side had retreated in defeat, they had not dealt with the enemy troops who had attacked them from behind. Although Xie Zhe did not have a strong desire for fame and fortune, as a military general, who would dislike having too much glory bestowed upon him, Xie Zhe was no exception. If they could completely defeat the enemy troops who had attacked them from behind, it would be a great achievement. Feng Ju saw that the situation was hopeless, and began to retreat in an orderly manner. However, the soldiers had lost their morale. One by one, they were like headless flies, throwing away their armor and running for their lives. The negative emotions were contagious. First, it affected a group of people, then it spread to thousands of people. Feng Ju saw this and his face turned ashen. He almost fell off the horse. Fortunately, he was supported by someone. Otherwise, he would have been injured or killed if he had fallen from such a high horse in such a chaotic situation. "Military advisor, this general will escort you out of here." Feng Ju woke up from the discomfort of the spinning world. His lips were dry and peeled, and he looked particularly haggard. "You don't have to worry about me. It's more important to gather the troops and retreat. As long as the Green Hills last, one need not worry about firewood. If they missed the best opportunity, they would be completely annihilated." Just as they were talking, a deafening battle cry came from behind them. Even though they had been fighting for several hours, and the soldiers were exhausted, the enemies in front of them were all meritorious. With meritorious service, they would be able to earn high rewards. No matter how tired their bodies were, their minds were still active and excited. "Oh no, military advisor, the enemy is here." As they fled, the number of soldiers around them grew fewer and fewer. The soldiers who were left behind were either hacked to death, or captured alive. General left the battlefield with nearly 1,000 of his trusted subordinates and Feng Ju. But Xie Zhe seemed to have eaten a weight, and was determined to chase after them. After a round of pursuit and encirclement, there were only 100 or 200 soldiers left. Most of them were injured, and had almost no combat power left. The enemy was still following closely behind. The night was getting darker and darker. A cold wind blew, bringing with it the strong smell of blood. It was so strong that it was nauseating. The battle cry was so faint that it seemed to be drifting from the horizon. Feng Ju stared at the enemy soldiers who surrounded them with a fierce look. Xie Zhe was riding a tall horse. The two sides were more than 10 feet apart. The soldiers surrounded them, and tied their hands behind their backs. They even put swords to their necks. Xie Zhe glanced around and was satisfied. He raised his hand and waved. "Take all of them back and wait for my lord to deal with them." Feng Ju tried to struggle, but the soldiers who restrained him were so strong that he couldn't move at all. There were different levels of captives. The soldiers who sold their physical strength were at the bottom of the pyramid. The value they produced was not enough for them to eat. Feng Ju belonged to the top of the pyramid. Xieze wanted to bring rare talents to his lord, regardless of whether they could pledge allegiance to her or not. To prevent Feng Ju from having thoughts of suicide, he even sent people to watch over him. Feng Ju snorted sarcastically. At the same time, Jiang Pingji led 5,000 troops to chase after Huang Song. Although it was said to be a chase, it was actually a slaughter. Many enemy soldiers tried to stop them, but they died under the horses' hooves. Their corpses were trampled into minced meat. Wherever the cavalry passed, piles of corpses were left. The darkness of the night was a good cover, but it didn't pose any obstacle to Jiang Pingji. Therefore, the time she took to catch up with Huang Song was much shorter than what he had expected. Facing 5,000 light and heavy cavalry, Huang Song only felt calm. Instead, he felt like it's finally here. Originally, there were 30,000 to 50,000 remaining soldiers to cover his escape, but the soldiers were already scared out of their wits by the enemy. How could they still have the will to fight? Under the onslaught of the enemy's pursuers, some fled, some got lost, and some fell apart. When Huang Song was besieged, there were less than 3,000 soldiers around him. 3,000 crippled soldiers against 5,000 elite cavalrymen. The result was obvious. This could be considered a one-sided slaughter. When Huang Song and the others were captured, the outcome was finally decided. Jiang Pingji swung the blood-stained god-slaying knife in her hand. The blood left a long mark on the ground. She called out loudly, "Is that Bogeo in front?" Hearing how Jiang Pingji addressed him, Huang Song, who was in dire straits, laughed bitterly. "Lanting, are you still willing to call me that? In this chaotic world, you and I have no choice. But business is business, personal is personal," Jiang Pingji said. "Don't you still call me Lanting?" "Yes, I have no choice." Huang Song looked dispirited. "But business is business. Lanting, have you thought about how to deal with me?" Jiang Pingji didn't say it explicitly. It wasn't a good place to talk about it. She said faintly, "I'm not a heartless person who kills indiscriminately. Back then, I chose this path because the situation forced me to. People weren't ambitious from the beginning." Huang Song was no different. Before the destruction of Dongqing, his ambition was to be an honest and capable official. He wanted to change the prejudice of others and bring prosperity to the country. However, this hotbed of troubled times gave him unprecedented ambition. Now that he had fallen from the peak to the bottom, he had to bow down to his former opponent. Most importantly, after submitting, he would be suspected for the rest of his life. Who would be willing to live such a life? Huang Song had considered the worst-case scenario. He would kill himself to protect his wife and children. But every time he thought of what his wife, Qi Chaolan, said that day, the courage to kill himself receded like the tide. He said, "Lanting, you've really given me a difficult problem." Chapter 1335. The night breeze blew, adding to the indescribable loneliness. Huang Song was silent for a long time, as if he was considering the truth of Jiang Pingji's words. "It's getting late. If we don't go back soon, I'm afraid Zixiao and the rest will get sick from anxiety." Jiang Pingji tilted her head and said to Jiang Nongqin, "Bogeo is my close friend. His status is not comparable to that of an ordinary person. Instruct your subordinates to be careful and not to neglect the distinguished guest." Jiang Nongqin had no objections. She accepted the order and said, "I will obey your orders." Although Huang Song was a captive, Jiang Pingji did not have any intention to kill him. Naturally, she would not deliberately humiliate him. If he was sensible, why not spare his life? If he would rather break than bend, she could only kill him. She and Huang Song were indeed friends, but feelings were a supplement and not a necessity for her. If she had to give it up, she would not be sentimental. Huang Song did not say anything, but he did not resist either. He tacitly agreed to Jiang Pingji's arrangements. Compared to his calmness and indifference, the reactions of the others were more intense. Some cried hysterically, some were like dead water, and all their hopes were dashed. Some were trembling with fear. When the soldiers wanted to tie him up with ropes, his body shook like a sieve. Despair shrouded them like dark clouds. No one knew where their future lay. According to the rules of the past, if the lord of a force was defeated and captured, Most of the officials under her would not have a good ending. Some could still jump ship and change bosses. Some would forever be suspected and suppressed, because they had a close relationship with their old masters. They would be depressed for the rest of their lives. Jiang Pingji did not think so much. She only knew that the battle between her and Huang Song had finally come to an end. All that was left was to deal with the aftermath and recover Haozhou. It would not take much time. After thinking about it carefully, she felt that the pressure on her shoulders had lightened. She even had the leisure to chat and laugh with Jiang Nongqin. Jiang Nongqin did not dare to keep pace with her lord. She maintained a respectful posture. Even when riding a horse, she lagged behind her by half a horse's body. Jiang Pingji said, "You have made such a great contribution this time. What do you want, Nongqin?" Jiang Nongqin said without hesitation, "It's my honor to go through fire and water for you, my lord. How can I claim credit and ask for rewards?" It was reasonable for her to give up her life for the lord. Jiang Nongqin did not lack anything. The lord had given her a chance to perform meritorious deeds, which was already considered a gift. Jiang Pingji sighed. "I know you are loyal to me, but you have to think about yourself." Jiang Nongqin said matter-of-factly, "I'm very good." She felt that her current life couldn't be any better. Her lord had given her a second life, and allowed her to live a life that she had never dared to imagine before. Occasionally, when she thought back to the past, she was a little surprised. Was the me before the age of 13 really her? She grew faster than her peers, and had a bigger appetite. Because of this, her parents treated her harshly and scolded her. Her grandmother regarded her as a jinx and repeatedly bullied her. At the worst, she broke a pole that was as thick as an arm. After that, her so-called relatives sold her to a broker in exchange for a meager amount of money. He entered the Lu residence by chance, but because he looked more mature, he was humiliated by the steward's son. She had long been ready to die. The Lord had given her the meaning and courage to live, allowing her to enter a level that most people in the world could not reach. In her heart, the lowly servant Arju had long died. The one who survived was the Lord's Jiang Nongqin. Jiang Pingji was very stingy with her feelings, but Jiang Nongqin was one of the special cases. "I heard that you and Jing Rong." Jiang Pingji was not a professional iceman, but every pair of mandarin ducks that had been brought together by her was a model couple. Jiang Nongqin's expression was calm. Not a trace of shyness could be seen. She was calm as if she was talking about the weather. "What's wrong with military advisor Yang? I remember that Nongqin is only a year and a few months older than me." Jiang Pingji said, "The war will stop for a while. Don't you want to take advantage of the gap to settle the matter between you and Jing Rong? His peers have given birth to a few children, but he is still alone." Jiang Nongqin frowned, and her tone was a little unfriendly. Of course, this unfriendly tone was directed at Yang Si. Could it be that military advisor Yang said something in front of the Lord? If not, why would the Lord suddenly urge them to get married? Jiang Pingji said, "No, I just dislike his old age. If the two of you don't hurry up, it will affect the children more or less." Jiang Nongqin said, "Will it?" Jiang Pingji said, "Jing Rong was addicted to alcohol when he was young, and his private lifestyle was tsk, he is old, so it will naturally affect him." Jiang Xiaowei had never doubted the Lord's words. "I will consider this matter carefully." Thinking of the children of the Golden Scale Academy, Jiang Nongqin's mind started to work. They were all the pillars of the Lord's future. Thinking of this, she did not seem to be very resistant to this matter. Jiang Pingji said, "If Nongqin gets married, I will prepare a wedding dowry for you that will definitely not be worse than those of the princes and their grandchildren." Marriage in ancient times was particular about matching families. The economic strength and social status of the man and the woman would not be too far apart. Therefore, the betrothal gifts and dowries of both parties were mostly equal. If one party was more powerful than the other, and the man's betrothal gift was less, others would criticize him for marrying into the family and claiming connections with the in-laws. If the woman's dowry was less, others would also criticize the woman's family for selling their daughter. If Jiang Pingji really wanted to prepare a wedding dowry for Jiang Nongqin, Yang Si would have to empty his family's pockets. Jiang Nongqin revealed a faint smile. her eyes overflowing with happiness. Yang Si was speechless. I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it. Jiang Pingji spent an hour before returning. Everyone was already looking forward to it, their necks stretched out. Hearing the movements of the army returning, they hurriedly went forward. Their first reaction was to look for Jiang Pingji. He looked left and right, and saw that his lord was unscathed. Only then did his little heart return to its original place. Jiang Pingji said, Bogeo and the rest entertain them well. Everything will be discussed tomorrow. Yes. Yang Si deliberately lagged a few steps behind, so that he could walk side by side with Jiang Nongqin. The latter was frowning, as if she was thinking about a huge problem. Jiang Nongqin said, for the next few days, military advisor Yang should abstain from alcohol and food. You should learn more about health from military advisor Wei. Yang Si asked, why? He did not know what Jiang Nongqin's temperament was like in the past, but after the two of them got to know each other, he realized that this woman was more reticent than anyone else. She rarely spoke so much at once, especially when she was concerned about his health. He was flattered by the sudden concern. Jiang Nongqin said, military advisor Yang, do you have any plans for having children? Yang Si said, I haven't thought about it. In the past he was an unmarried dink. He did not even have a wife, so where would he get a child? Jiang Nongqin said, I hope that he will be a promising successor. If he can't be brought up, it's better to get rid of him early, so that he won't tarnish the family's reputation. Yang Si was speechless. With such a mother, the child would have to open his eyes wide and weigh his own worth before reincarnating. Chapter 1336. Jiang Nongqin was different from ordinary women. Although the two of them communicated their thoughts, Yang Si felt that there was still a gap between them. She took the initiative to bring up the topic. Yang Si felt that he had finally written the first line. The rest was much simpler. However, the two of them were not emotional people. They talked more about official matters. He asked curiously, where did the Lord capture Huang Song? Jiang Nongqin said, it doesn't matter where. No matter where he is, he can't escape from the Lord's palm. Yang Si had a certain immunity to such die-hard comments. He automatically ignored them. Did he have any extreme reactions when he was captured? Jiang Nongqin said, he's like a turtle in a jar. What's the use of resisting? The Lord treats him well. If he doesn't appreciate it, he'll die. Yang Si was speechless. His heart disease was going to act up again. Apart from a small number of people who were separated in the chaos, most of the mainstays under Huang Song's command were captured and became Jiang Pingji's prisoners. The latter did not have the habit of abusing captives, but she would not treat defeated people as distinguished guests. Apart from Huang Song, who was treated well, the other people's conditions were very ordinary. The food supply was the same as that of ordinary soldiers. Some people flew into a rage and knocked over their food. Some people ate in silence. Cheng Jing was detained alone, so Wei Xi easily found him. When he saw Cheng Jing, Wei Xi was carrying a food box in his hand. There were a few plates of hot dishes and freshly made white rice on the top of the box. At the bottom was a set of clean clothes that he had never worn before. Wei Xi did not expect to see Cheng Jing again. According to the trajectory of his previous life, the latter would commit suicide in prison. On second thought, the friendship between Cheng Jing and Huang Song was not as deep as it was in his previous life. Naturally, he would not commit suicide for his master. Cheng Jing was locked in a small tent. There were many soldiers guarding outside. He could not escape even if he had wings. Why are you here? Cheng Jing put down his bowl and chopsticks. He raised his head to look at Wei Xi and said with understanding, did you become a lobbyist? It was dark inside the tent. There was only a dim oil lamp on the low table. It made Cheng Jing look even more haggard and wretched. Wei Xi did not say anything. He bent down to take a few candles and kindling from the bottom of the food box, and lit them up one by one. Only then did the tent become much brighter. My lord did not instruct me on this, Wei Xi said straightforwardly. I'm just worried that my senior brother will be neglected, so I came over to take a look. Under the candlelight, Wei Xi saw that Cheng Jing's chin had green stubble, and his eyes were bloodshot. Where was his usual elegant demeanor? Cheng Jing did not get angry. He would not be surprised if Wei Xi was really a lobbyist. You rarely call me senior brother Jing. Wei Xi was considered Master Yuanjing's last disciple. The seniority of the disciples did not depend on their age, but on the time they joined the sect. After all, we're from the same sect. Whether you call him senior brother or Yumo, isn't it still the same person? Wei Xi took a seat opposite Cheng Jing and took out the dishes from the food box. The aroma of the food assailed their nostrils and made their thumbs twitch. Even though Cheng Jing didn't have much of an appetite right now, when he smelled the aroma of food, he faintly felt hungry. The corners of Cheng Jing's mouth twitched as he forced a smile. Zixia wants to use this to bribe people? Wei Xi said as he took out 2 jars of wine. Today, we won't talk about official matters. We'll just reminisce about the past. Cheng Jing's temperament was different from his other brothers. Wei Xi wasn't confident that he could convince him to join the Lord. Wei Xi might not believe it, but this time, he was really here to take care of senior brother Cheng Jing. There was one thing that Wei Xi didn't understand in his previous and current lives. Why did Cheng Jing follow Huang Song? Wasn't his Tao to follow the will of heaven and support the orthodox? Whether it was in terms of family background or personal charm, Huang Song was worlds apart from the word orthodox. Wei Xi asked without hesitation. Cheng Jing took a sip of wine. This wine was very different from what he usually drank. The taste was more mellow, and there was a burning sensation as it flowed down his throat. The aftereffect was quite strong. After drinking a few cups, his face turned red. His eyes were watery, and he was also a little sleepy. Zixiao, do you know the origin of the lords? Bogeo's ancestors? Wei Xi was stunned. Isn't this person from the Yuanshi family? Cheng Jing said. Bogeo's branch is the only surviving descendant of the Xia royal family. In the last years of the Xia kingdom, the royal family was almost wiped out. Our ancestors were grateful for the great ancestors' promotion, so they risked their lives to escort the last emperor's young daughter to escape. They hid in a branch of the family and carefully took care of her as she grew up. However, no one told her her identity. Our ancestors also treated her as their own daughter. At that time, the world was divided into 5 countries. If her identity was revealed, not only would it harm her, it would also implicate the Cheng family. Wei Xi suddenly understood something. In that case, the last emperor's concubine married into the Yuanshi family? Cheng Jing nodded, confirming Wei Xi's words. At that time, the Yuanshi family was still considered a prominent martial family. The Cheng family married the concubine into this family in order to better protect this bloodline. Who would have thought that the ancestors of the Yuanshi family would make mistakes one after another? And in just 2 generations, they fell into such dire straits. Huang Song's grandfather committed a crime and almost implicated the 3 families. It was only with the help of the Cheng family that the matter was settled. The death penalty could be forgiven, but punishment was inevitable. Huang Song's father was exiled and died halfway through. The orphan and widowed mother had no one to rely on, and the Yuanshi family refused to take care of them. Huang Song's mother could only rely on her embroidery skills to earn money to support the family. When Huang Song's mother was widowed, she was still very young. By chance, she caught the eye of the Dongqing emperor's favorite chamberlain, Huang Tan, and he came to ask for her hand in marriage. Huang Song's mother remarried, and Huang Song's father changed his surname to Huang Tan's stepson. Huang Song naturally followed his father's surname. Not many people knew about this old past. Even Huang Song himself did not know. Of course, Cheng Jing assisted him partly because of their bloodline, but also because Huang Song had his merits. If he could restore the glory of his ancestors, that would be the best. Senior brother, tell me about this. Wei Xi was a little puzzled. According to the normal scenario, if the Lord knew that Huang Song had this relationship, Huang Song's life would be in danger. Cheng Jing said, the remaining power of the Xia kingdom has long been gone. Whether Bogeo has royal blood or not, does it matter? Moreover, there were only a few people who knew about this matter, and most of them were dying. Who would believe that the grandson of a eunuch in the eyes of outsiders was actually the last descendant of the previous dynasty's royal family? Senior brother also said that the Xia kingdom no longer exists. Do you still insist that they are the legitimate ones? Wei Xi asked. Cheng Jing smiled and said, that depends on whether the Duke of Lanting that you serve can become the legitimate one. When others heard this, they would probably think that Cheng Jing had the intention to pledge allegiance, but Wei Xi knew very well that he was determined not to pledge allegiance. Unless the Lord can really ascend to the throne. Wei Xi sighed and said, Senior brother, do you have the heart to waste your time and be an idler in the mountains? Cheng Jing said, this is not a question of whether I have the heart or not. This is a question of whether the Duke of Lanting is willing to fulfill my wish. He did not have the initiative. Cheng Jing was not against serving Jiang Pingji, but it was not the current her. Wei Xi said, Senior brother, don't you think it's a pity? What a waste of a good time. If the world was at peace, it would be extremely difficult for Cheng Jing to be put in an important position. Would he really not be depressed in the future? Cheng Jing said, there's Wei Xi, Yang Si and Han Yu. Cheng Jing is not missing. The Yuans under Huang Song were the only ones who were powerful. He had seen how much harm they had caused. If the Langya branch was completely powerful, would Jiang Pingji feel that she could not do anything alone? It was better to retreat in the face of the current and seek peace. It would not be too late to become an official after the world was at peace. Chapter 1337. Wei Xi got up and bade farewell. He stopped in front of the tent and said, I will not hide Huang Song's past from you, my lord. It was true that Cheng Jing was Wei Xi's eldest senior brother, but Jiang Pingji was Wei Xi's lord and true love. There was a distinction between close and distant, and there was a distinction between public and private interests. It's fine. Cheng Jing closed his eyes lightly. He was not surprised by Wei Xi's choice. It would be strange if Wei Xi helped Huang Song hide the truth. Countless thoughts flashed through Wei Xi's mind. The scenes of his previous life flashed past his eyes quickly, and finally turned into a sigh. In his previous life, he had been very curious as to why Huang Song, who was only the son of a eunuch, was favored by Cheng Jing, and the Cheng clan did not object. Unfortunately, they were not fated to be brothers. Wei Xi did not even make it to Cheng Jing's funeral, much less seek Cheng Jing to resolve his doubts. If Huang Song was a descendant of the previous dynasty's imperial family, everything would make sense. Wei Xi hurriedly went to look for Jiang Pingji. She had just finished bathing, and was dressed in moon-white pajamas with a large, warm cloak draped over her shoulders. Her long, jet-black hair was steaming and fragrant after a bath. When Wei Xi walked over, she was sitting on the couch, wiping her wet hair with her body turned sideways. What is it, Zixiao? Jiang Pingji twisted the ends of her hair with a dry towel as she tilted her head, and asked Wei Xi. Under the illumination of the orange-yellow candlelight, Jiang Pingji's side profile seemed to have a gentle filter. The gentle color of her brows and eyes made Wei Xi's heart beat wildly. Wei Xi pretended to be calm, as he bowed with his hands clasped in front, and greeted respectfully. Only then did he open his mouth to explain the purpose of his visit. His eyes were fixed on Jiang Pingji's hair. She looked at her wet hair, then at Wei Xi, and handed him the cloth. Wei Xi was stunned on the spot for a while. He went forward and half-knelt beside her. He raised his hand to take the towel from her hand, and carefully wiped her wet hair. His movements were very gentle, as if every strand of hair was a treasure to him. In comparison, Jiang Pingji's movements were much rougher. Just now, I went to visit senior brother Cheng Jing. During our conversation, I heard a piece of news. My lord should also listen to it. Jiang Pingji casually crossed her legs, and rested her elbows on her knees. She looked relaxed. News? What kind of news is so important that you have to come all the way here? And at this time? If it was not important news, why would Wei Xi look for her at such an ambiguous time? Wasn't this sending the quack to the tiger's den? Wei Xi said, regarding Huang Song's past. Jiang Pingji frowned and asked in confusion, Bogeo's past? Is there anything special about his background? She didn't have any opinions about family status, but she also knew that Huang Song's family background was very criticized. Could it be that there was a twist in this? Wei Xi said softly. On the surface, Huang Song is the step-grandson of Dongqing's minister Huang Tan. He comes from the Yuan family, but there's more to it than meets the eye. According to his senior apprentice brother, Huang Song's ancestor was actually the Empress concubine of the last emperor of the Grand Xia Empire. Back then, the Xia kingdom was destroyed, and the world was divided into 5 parts. The royal family was almost completely wiped out. Only the Cheng clan's ancestor remembered old kindness and risked his life to bring the infant Empress concubine out of the palace, placing her in the Cheng clan's branch family to raise. Many years later, this Empress concubine married into the Yuan clan. The branch emperor concubine belongs to his Huang Song's branch, so he is a descendant of the imperial family. Jiang Pingji said, "Why haven't I heard of this?" Wei Ci combed her wet hair with his fingers and said, "Once the identity of being a descendant of the Xia kingdom's imperial family gets out, it will definitely lead to the destruction of the clan. It's reasonable for the Cheng clan to keep it a secret." My senior brother assisted Huang Song. Huang Song's identity is also part of the reason. Jiang Pingji recalled Cheng Jing's temperament. Wei Ci's words were 90% true. However, Jiang Pingji said, "The founder of the Xia kingdom's imperial family was also of humble origin, right? Cheng Jing is so persistent about being a descendant of the Xia kingdom's imperial family? It doesn't make sense." In terms of background, Huang Song was also a distance away from being orthodox. Wei Ci knew that some parts of his lord's history weren't very good, but he wasn't surprised. Instead, he considerately and attentively explained to her, "My lord, you may not know this, but although the founder of the Xia kingdom's imperial family was of humble origin, his ancestors were also illustrious and wealthy. According to the history of this time and space, the recent history included the chaotic times of the 16 kingdoms, the Xia kingdom, the 5 kingdoms, and the current chaotic times. Before the 16 kingdoms, the Central Plains had also been unified for 367 years, and it was called Beichen. The genealogy of the Xia kingdom's imperial family could be traced back to the Beichen royal family. The history of the Cheng clan's prosperity was also calculated from the period when Beichen was prosperous." Jiang Pingji listened carefully and laughed. "I didn't expect Bogeo to have such an ancestor. Does he know about this?" Wei Ci shook his head and said, "Most likely he doesn't know. If he knew, he would have used this to change the public's opinion. In an era that was particular about one's background, it was better to rely on one's ancestors. Even if one's ancestor had long passed away, he could still protect his descendants in public opinion. If Huang Song could be blessed with this huge halo, why would he have to bear the stigma of being the grandson of a eunuch for so many years?" Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "If I were Bogeo, even if I knew, I wouldn't say anything." Wei Ci asked, "Why?" Jiang Pengji said, "How could such an important card be revealed from the beginning? The world's evaluation of him is so unbearable. Even if he can dig out the genealogy to prove his identity, outsiders won't believe it. They will only believe in the facts that they have determined. Instead, they will slander Huang Song for using unscrupulous means to build up support and slander his ancestors. When he has a certain level of success and can look down on others, it will be better to reveal it. No matter how good the card was, it still depended on the timing." That was what he said, but Huang Song really did not know about this. Cheng Jing also planned to reveal it when the time was right. However, Cheng Jing could not wait for this opportunity. Jiang Pingji raised her hand and tucked her long hair behind her ear. A faint smile hung at the corner of her lips, as if she did not take Wei Ci's news to heart. Wei Ci asked, "How do you plan to deal with Huang Song, my lord?" Jiang Pingji said, "He's a friend after all. I don't plan to kill him. The decision of how to deal with him lies in his own hands." "Do you mean to let him go, my lord?" Wei Ci's hand paused. "If you don't pull out the roots, my lord knows, there will be endless trouble in the future." Jiang Pingji played with her hair and said with a smile, "Naturally, I won't let him go so easily. There is no free lunch in this world. If he wants to protect the lives of himself and his family, he has to pay a price. I guarantee that he will not become a threat to me in the future. There was only one life. If it was gone, it would be gone." It all depended on whether Huang Song was willing to pay for it. A trace of doubt flashed in Wei Ci's eyes. He did not know what his lord had thought of. I plan to have a talk with Bogeo. If he agrees, what's wrong with me letting him go? If he doesn't agree, I will give him a dignified death for the sake of our friendship in the past. Jiang Pengji grabbed her half-dry hair. By the way, what's Ching Jing's attitude? Wei Xi said vaguely. He supports the orthodoxy. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and asked in return, what if I become the orthodoxy? Wei Xi said, I'll be at your command, my lord. Chapter 1338. Jiang Pengji asked Wei Xi to help her dry her hair. She took out a green hair tie and tied her long, smooth hair behind her back. The attire greatly reduced her original sharpness, but instead added a touch of gentleness. She had the charm of a girl for the first time. Zixiao, are you curious about the method I used to solve Bogeo's problem? Wei Xi nodded honestly. He was indeed curious, but there were some things he couldn't ask too deeply. He could only bury his doubts in his heart. Zixiao, why don't you come with me? Jiang Pengji stood up and tidied the clothes draped over her shoulders. She said with a smile, if I go to see Bogeo like this and no one follows me, who knows what kind of scandals will happen outside? They did have scandals in the past, but no one took it seriously. Wei Xi lowered his eyes and didn't comment, but the curvature of his lips revealed his inner thoughts. Oh yes, remember to bring a set of brush, ink and paper. Bring a few more sets of paper. Jiang Pengji leisurely walked in her wooden clogs to see Huang Song. Wei Xi followed closely. The patrolling soldiers stood and saluted when they saw the two of them. Bogeo shouldn't be asleep yet, right? Wei Xi said with a smile. Once he becomes my lord's captive, I'm afraid he won't be able to sleep even if he has a big heart. Huang Song indeed hadn't fallen asleep. He tossed and turned over Jiang Pengji's words. How will you know if it's a difficult or easy question if you don't try? He wasn't sure what Jiang Pengji meant. It wasn't that he was stupid, he just didn't dare to believe it. What was the reason for letting him go? Was it because of the so-called youthful friendship? Such an excuse could only deceive ignorant people. In the face of conflicts of interest, all emotions had to give way to conflicts of interest. If Jiang Pengji was an emotional person, perhaps it would be somewhat believable. However, he was a rational person and wouldn't easily be swayed by his emotions. He thought about it and still felt that it was better to commit suicide. As long as he died, Jiang Pengji wouldn't be ruthless toward his former officials. At the same time, she would treat his family well. The wife and children shouldn't be implicated. A dignified lord wouldn't treat orphans and widows harshly for the sake of his reputation. Su Pei's family was the best example. Han Yu had also joined Jiang Pengji's camp. He would more or less take care of his former master's family and children. It might not be very glamorous, but at least they would be safe. Huang Song's current mood was somewhat similar to Jiang Pengji's in the past. Back then, she had been betrayed and slandered by her companions, and the Federation had secretly arrested her. Her first reaction was to resist arrest by force and chase, after the real culprit single-handedly. As a soldier of the Federation, she naturally trusted it, but because of the conflict of interests, this trust had to be marked with a question mark. I knew you hadn't slept. After Jiang Pengji entered the tent, she happened to see Huang Song staring blankly at the saber on the table. She smiled without changing her expression. Behind her were Wei Xi and a few cooks from the logistics department. The cooks were carrying utensils for roasting meat and hot pot, as well as many ingredients. Huang Song looked up and was dumbfounded. What kind of stance is this? Jiang Pengji said. I'm looking for you for supper. I'm hungry. Huang Song. Jiang Pengji raised her hand and threw the sword to Wei Xi. She asked casually, Bogeo, is this sword expensive? This sword was given to me by my grandfather when he was crowned Emperor Song. Although it isn't precious, it holds great significance. Jiang Pengji said. So it was a gift from an elder? If the elder knew that the sword he gave you ended your life, he wouldn't feel good. As she spoke, the cooks tidied up the table and set up the roasting pan and cauldron. The ingredients were placed on a separate rack. Another person lit the cauldron and poured the seasoning that had been seasoned with good flavor. It's a pity that alcohol is forbidden in the army. Otherwise, we can have supper and drink at the same time. Jiang Pengji sat opposite Huang Song. while Wei Xi sat beside her and behind her. Lanting, why are you here? Huang Song didn't have the appetite to eat. He said directly, what's the matter? Why don't you tell me? Jiang Pingji moved her chopsticks and put the ingredients into the boiling pot. She smiled and said, when we're 60 years old, I wonder if we'll have the opportunity to have a meal together. Huang Song's expression changed. Lanting, what do you mean? I don't like to force things. You know my temperament, Jiang Pingji said. If you've made up your mind to die, I'll take care of your funeral properly based on our past friendship. If you still have the thought of living, I'm not a narrow-minded person who can't tolerate others. Huang Song knew her true attitude when she spoke so clearly. After a long time. For hidden dangers, it's best to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. You keep such a hidden danger. When did you become soft-hearted? Soft-hearted and reckless. When did you see me with such a thing? Jiang Pingji said. I'm willing to keep you. Naturally, I'm prepared. Let's make a pact. If you can agree to it, I'll naturally have the magnanimity to tolerate you. Jiang Pingji's solution was to make a pact with Huang Song. If he wanted his life, he would have to give up a certain amount of freedom and rights as the price. Huang Song was silent. I'm willing to swear an oath of blood with you. You don't have to worry that I'll betray you before the blood in my mouth dries. Huang Song's expression changed. He looked at Jiang Pingji with a complicated gaze. She was serious. It was the first time Huang Song recognized this point so clearly. In this era, everything was bad except for the high moral bottom line. They valued the spirit of the contract very much. After the oath was made, both parties would be bound. If one party took the lead in betraying the covenant, the moral level would be untenable. The other party could be ruthless and not be condemned by public opinion. To put it more clearly, both parties would sign a contract and abide by it. The contents of the contract would definitely favor Jiang Pingji. Huang Song would be the bound party. It was not enough to just have the oath. Jiang Pingji wanted everyone to know about the oath. Not only would it bind Huang Song, but it would also bind his former officials. It was not a big deal to let Huang Song live. She wanted Huang Song to live well, so that his former officials would not dare to have a trace of disloyalty. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, if Bogeo is willing, we can discuss the contents of the oath while eating. Huang Song laughed bitterly and said, Lanting's thoughts are really very meticulous. Jiang Pingji turned her head and said, then I'll have to trouble Zixiao to help me write. Wei Xi agreed. The contents of the contract favored Jiang Pingji, but it was not unacceptable to Huang Song. It was even more lenient than expected. Huang Song's third generation would not be able to control real power, but his great-grandchildren could enter officialdom through normal channels. Huang Song himself would be conferred a title in the future, and his title would be inherited for 3 generations. Losing power and a certain amount of freedom in exchange for peace and wealth for the rest of his life. For the defeated, this was a good ending. It was much better than Su Pei's family, who had lost the protection of the head of the family and lived in fear. Huang Song carefully looked at the dozen pages of the contract that Wei Xi had drafted and asked a question. Children and grandchildren can't enter officialdom. What about daughters? Jiang Pingji said, if your daughter is capable, she can. Based on the current trend, men had far more political rights than women. Therefore, Jiang Pingji restricted Huang Song and his third generation. After all, they were old friends. She did not want Huang Song's family, who had no real power, to be looked down upon. Therefore, she left some leeway. As long as Huang Song's daughter and granddaughter entered officialdom, his former officials who did not believe in him would not support them on account of their past relationship. Therefore, this group of people could not say anything about women entering officialdom. Wei Xi was speechless. Chapter 1339. Jiang Pingji ate her fill and got up to leave with Wei Xi. She realized that Wei Xi had been silent since the beginning. He was still holding a pile of contracts in his arms, as if he was thinking deeply about something. Jiang Pingji suddenly stopped. Wei Xi did not stop in time and bumped into her. She did not react, but Wei Xi did not stabilize his center of gravity and took 2 steps back. He came to his senses and quickly bowed to apologize. Jiang Pingji asked him, "What are you thinking about, Zixiao?" Wei Xi would hide it from others, but he would not hide it from the person in front of him. As long as she asked, he would tell her everything he knew. He said, "I'm thinking about my lord's intentions." Jiang Pingji tilted her head and looked at him. She chuckled and said, "What intentions could I have?" Wei Xi analyzed. "My lord and Huang Song made a blood pact. On the surface, this pact is not binding Huang Song, but my lord. Huang Song had already been defeated. If the lord wanted him to live or die, how could Huang Song the loser resist?" Not only did Jiang Pingji keep Huang Song alive, but she also wanted to make a blood pact with him. Huang Song lost his power and certain freedom, but he and his family no longer had any worries. As long as his family behaved themselves, no one could touch Huang Song's family, be it the lord or the future lord. A mere pact could protect the lives of Huang Song's 3 generations. When his great-grandchildren were born and grew up, it would be 50 or 60 years later. 50 or 60 years was neither long nor short. The world would change. Who knew what would happen in the future? Anyone with a discerning eye could see that this pact was not only not a bad thing for Huang Song, but it was also a great thing. However, Wei Xi smelled something different. Huang Song's words, "Children and grandchildren can't become officials, but what about daughters?" inspired him. The idle members of the royal family had no power. Their lives were worse than those of ordinary aristocrats. Not to mention that Huang Song and Jiang Pingji had fought for the throne. Without power and being unable to become an official, what was the use of being a noble? In order to keep the family name, Huang Song's descendants had to expend energy to train their daughters, and even granddaughters to help them enter the official career. Huang Song's old officials would not stop them for the sake of their past friendship and immediate benefits. Instead, they would push them from behind. 50 or 60 years was enough for the power structure of the court to change dramatically. When the Empress ascended the throne, she could use force to overcome the chaos. After peace, the officials still hoped for a male heir to inherit the throne. The risk of a woman giving birth was too great. No one could guarantee that a woman giving birth would not be dangerous. To the officials, male heirs did not have the burden of pregnancy. Their chances of survival were higher, and they were more effective in stabilizing the court. In addition, women's status in the imperial court was too low. This was also one of the problems that hindered the succession system of the Empress. Wei Xi guessed with a trembling heart. Was his lord paving the way for the future crown princess? Back then, when the crown princess was conferred and the previous inheritance mechanism was overturned, His Majesty, Wei Xi, was under a lot of pressure. Had he already made arrangements in this life? At the thought of his daughter from his past life, Wei Xi could not help but feel his eyes welling up. Although the emperor had resisted the pressure to make the crown princess, the officials had never stopped questioning Jiang Yan. She could only shut those people up if she did it flawlessly. One could imagine what kind of pressure this successor had to bear from birth to adulthood. Wei Xi was lost in thought. If his lord were to pave the way for her now, the pressure Yener would have to endure in the future. Would it be less? Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "I'm not willing to suffer any losses. I gave Bogeo some benefits so that he could repay me more." Wei Xi was more certain of his guess after hearing it. "My lord, you mean?" Wei Xi almost bit his tongue. He could not pronounce his words clearly. "You want," Jiang Pingji said. "I heard you talk about her." Wei Xi was surprised. "When Han Mei and Wan'er got married, you were drunk. You even warned Feng Yu from Zisher's family not to harm Yener. Is that child called Jiang Yan?" Wei Xi's heart was thumping wildly. He could not remember this at all. Jiang Pingji laughed to herself. Her hearing was amazing. How could Wei Xi's small movements escape her ears? She had a daughter called Jiang Yan. Feng Zhen had a child called Feng Yu who was her lover. She was quite satisfied with this spoiler. Wei Xi admitted, "Yes, her name is Jiang Yan." Jiang Pingji said, "She must be a very outstanding child. She looks like my lord, but her temperament is not the same. Yener's temperament is more reserved and deep. She was able to give lectures when she was only 10 years old." Even Wei Xi could not understand his daughter's thoughts. As the only heir to the new dynasty, other than herself, no one could imagine how much pressure she carried on her shoulders. Wei Xi could only accompany her in her studies, as much as possible, and teach her knowledge. Every time I see the Grand Tutor, I always feel very comfortable. I don't like those who only know how to drop books. They have never been emperors before. How would they know what an emperor should do? They only know how to read from the books. I've memorized all of them. This was what Jiang Yan said when she was 4 years old. It was also a rare willful statement from her. She usually did things very steadily. In comparison, Wei Tsong was more like a child. When Wei Xi realized that Jiang Yan had reached adulthood, he vaguely realized that the child had grown into a different person. She was the most qualified heir. Reserved and deep? Jiang Pingji said, "She looks more like you." She knew very well what kind of temper she had, but her future daughter had a calm personality. Wei Xi said, "My lord, are you paving the way for Yan this time? The past life is different from this one. If we have a child in the future, we don't know if it will be Yan Jiang Pingji said calmly. However, some things have to be prepared as soon as possible. Whether it's Yan or not, she's still our daughter. Huang Song's family prepared it for her. For this reason, I can tolerate Bogeo." She was not only interested in Huang Song, but also Huang Song's connections and old ministers. If she operated them well, they would definitely be of help. Since she knew the difficulties that she might face in the future, she could make arrangements early so that she would bear less pressure in the future. Wei Xi said, "Parents love their children, so they have far-reaching plans." Jiang Pingji smiled and winked. "Our relationship is still clean. There are still 7 long years before we become parents. Zixiao, don't make me wait too long." Wei Xi was speechless. She always flirted with him. His lord's style was really different from her previous life. Jiang Pingji said, "Other than Jiang Yan, we have other children?" Wei Xi was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, "I have a son named Wei Kong. His courtesy name is Tingzhang." Hearing the surnames and names of the 2 children, Jiang Pingji understood the meaning behind it. She did not probe further. Instead, she returned to her tent. According to her observation, the 2 children were probably the wounds in Wei Xi's heart. This matter should be discussed later. The next day, Jiang Pingji gathered everyone and told them about her and Huang Song's blood oath. Everyone frowned slightly. They all agreed to eliminate Huang Song. But it was not impossible for their lord to keep Huang Song. Chapter 1340. The crowd did not understand Jiang Pingji's future, as well as Wei Xi. Naturally, they did not see the hidden scheme in it. However, based on the contents of the alliance, their lord did not suffer any losses. Under this premise, as long as Huang Song kept his promise, it would not be a problem to spare his life. Jiang Pingji asked, "Does anyone have a different opinion?" No one had any objections. If there was, it was mostly because they felt that the ban on the 3rd generation was too short. The 3 generations referred to Huang Song, Huang Song's sons, and Huang Song's grandsons. That guy had already married and had children. His children were already a few years old. It seemed that it would only take a few years for his great-grandchildren to grow up. Everyone was worried that the time was too short. However, calculating the time, by the time Huang Song's great-grandchildren became officials, he would have long been buried. His former officials would not be left. Thinking about it this way, it was acceptable to ban the 3rd generation from becoming officials. The Lord allowed Huang Song to live, but she would not let him and his descendants be unable to become officials forever. This was not showing mercy, but deliberately finding fault. Jiang Pingji saw that the young princesses were so reasonable and felt satisfied. She then ordered people to prepare for the alliance ceremony. She had formed alliances with people many times, but most of them were verbal agreements. An alliance made with blood was different. The audience in the streaming room thought that this kind of alliance was like dripping blood into a wine cup and drinking it. In reality, it was smearing the blood of livestock on the lips to show sincerity and determination to form an alliance. For a TV series, the former was naturally more expressive. Jiang Pingji turned off the streaming earlier yesterday, so the idle audience did not know the details of her and Huang Song having supper and talking about the alliance. When they first arrived in the streaming room that day, They were shocked by the development of the story. Many of them even expressed doubt and worry about it. Xiaoben. Streamer, you broke the agreement and pretended to be an official, right? Can you guarantee that Huang Song's descendants will not secretly stir up trouble? In ancient novels, the character of Huang Song's descendants was the proper male lead. The ancestors and the royal family failed to fight for the world. In order to appease the people, the royal family pretended to be benevolent and righteous. The descendants had no choice but to yield to reality. In the male lead's generation, he was the most outstanding existence. He was even envied and hated by the cruel and tyrannical emperor. He was always on guard against suppressing the male lead. The male and female protagonists fell in love while laying low, conserving their strength. After a series of struggles, they overthrew the royal family and replaced them. The audience was tired of watching this kind of plot and couldn't help but worry that Huang Song's descendants would make trouble. It was better to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Goo 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 goo. Although it's not good to kill the innocent, you have to think about yourself and your descendants. It's dangerous to keep Huang Song alive. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie. It's very serious to swear an oath with blood. Both parties will not break the contract easily, let alone sign a paper contract. For a more recent example, during the Long March, a certain marshal also used the method of blood oath to make an agreement with the ethnic minorities not to offend each other. Although ancient times were backward in all aspects, their spirit of contract was very worthy of praise. If it was just a verbal agreement, they would have to rely on their own morals to fulfill the agreement. Naturally, there would be more people who would break the agreement. However, Jiang Pingji put all the terms into practice. While they pledged their alliance by drinking blood, there was an additional procedure to sign the alliance contract. It was written in black and white, and the alliance was the proof. Who would take the initiative to break the agreement? Han Yu and Cheng Jing, as the MCs of both parties, checked the two agreements separately to make sure that there was no difference between the content of the alliance contract and the agreed terms. After the check, Han Yu read it aloud to let the officials and soldiers who witnessed the alliance contract know what was written in it. If there are no objections, you and I will sign it. Huang Song sighed. Of course not. He picked up the pen and dipped it in red ink. He signed his name at the end of the agreement and stamped it with his private seal. That was not enough. They also needed to leave their handprints on the agreement. Jiang Pingji pulled out a dagger and cut her palm with a poker face. She clenched her fist and blood covered her entire palm. Huang Song saw that she was so bold, so he silently gave up the delicate action of using the ink pad. But he had no sharp weapon with him, so he could only borrow her dagger. There were two copies of the alliance contract. One was kept by Jiang Pingji, and the other by Huang Song. Jiang Pingji dipped her finger in the bowl filled with animal blood, and wiped the blood on her lips. Huang Song did the same. She said happily, "The alliance contract has been signed. It seems that it is not impossible for us to have dinner together when we are 60 years old." Huang Song thought that he had a long life, but the person in front of him might not. However, if he dared to say that out loud, the people behind Jiang Pingji would definitely beat him to death. Under the supervision of his desire to live, Huang Song could only swallow the words in his heart silently. The alliance contract was signed, but it was not over so easily. Huang Song couldn't help but sigh when he thought of Cheng Jing and the others. He had failed to live up to their high hopes and expectations. My lord, why did it have to be like this? Yuan Chang's wounds were treated, but because of his action, the gauze was stained with blood again. He didn't care about it at all and continued. It was all because of my incompetence that I failed to protect my lord. So my lord. Thinking of his lord's experience, Yuan Chong was so sad that his eyes turned red. If it wasn't for his incompetence, how could his lord fall into the hands of Lu Shi? Huang Song hurriedly interrupted Yuan Chong and raised his hand to help him up. There were many generals in the Yuan family. Although each of them had their own thoughts, there was no lack of sincere and loyal people. Huang Song only felt that he owed Yuan Chong, but Yuan Chong did not owe him. Heng Shu, why do you say that? Huang Song laughed bitterly. The more Yuan Chong behaved this way, the more he felt guilty and sad. As his lord, he owed everyone too much. He was afraid that he could not repay them in this lifetime. After much persuasion, Yuan Chong was finally appeased, but the sorrowful atmosphere only increased. Everyone looked as if they had lost their parents. Huang Song and Feng Ju looked at each other from a distance. The latter's expression was gloomy and cold. Has my lord thought about what to do in the future? One of the strategists asked Huang Song. His voice was a little hoarse. Huang Song said, Lanting is a person who keeps her promises. Since she swore an oath with blood, she won't break it easily. I'm not worried about myself. Instead, I'm more worried about you. You're all in the prime of your lives. You can't just retire and waste your talents, can you? For an ambitious person, wasting time was the cruelest punishment. Huang Song was not a sore loser. He did not mind the old officials pledging allegiance to Jiang Pingji. As the saying went, parents could remarry, not to mention the ruler and the officials. When everyone heard this, they felt even sadder. Some people even burst into tears. Huang Song was not completely selfless. He had his own plans. Because the covenant stipulated that the male heirs of the third generation of Huang Song were not allowed to become officials, he could only think of ways to train his daughter. If the old officials pledged allegiance to Jiang Pingji, they would be his daughter's natural support in the court in the future. Huang Song's childhood experience told him that reputation and everything else were fake. Only strength could earn people's respect. Jiang Pingji would grant him a title of nobility for 3 generations in the future. But it was an empty title without power. If others were willing to respect you, it meant that they thought highly of you. If they were not willing to respect you, you could only accept it. As the head of the family, Huang Song naturally could not let his family face such a predicament. Therefore, he had to plan slowly now. Chapter 1341. Cheng Jing was not the only one under Huang Song who was unwilling to surrender. Jiang Pingji would not mind anything, but having more people she could use. Huang Song's old officials were unwilling to surrender. She would suffer a great loss. This plan was not only to pave the way for her future daughter, but also to let Huang Song persuade these people to surrender. It was not difficult to persuade others to surrender. The only difficulty was Cheng Jing and Feng Ju. Needless to say, there were only 2 reasons why Cheng Jing was unwilling to surrender. First, the time was not ripe. Second, Jiang Pingji's Langya County was too powerful. If he was included, Yuan Jing would have 3 of his 4 disciples. He did not want to cause trouble for his teacher and junior brothers. Even if Jiang Pingji was not a person who liked to be suspicious, it was difficult to guarantee that others would not feel a sense of crisis. If Wei Ci were here, he would also agree with Cheng Jing's idea. Wasn't Wei Ci like that in his previous life? Even if he had no intention of rebelling, even if his original intention of supporting the descendants of the Wei family was for Her Majesty, the Wei family's restlessness aroused the suspicion and vigilance of Qiguan Rang and the others. Once the meteorite fell from the sky, Wei Ci almost lost his life. The Wei family was also completely suppressed. Even if they were in the same power, there would be discordant voices within. If one faction's influence was allowed to expand, the other factions would naturally feel a sense of crisis and urgency. This was also the beginning of internal discord. People always had selfishness and preferences. It was not that there were no people who truly served the public wholeheartedly without distractions, but there were too few. Even these people were not absolutely obedient. They would loyally eradicate what they thought was a threat. Cheng Jing tactfully expressed his worries. Naturally, Huang Song could not force him. Then, why was Feng Ju unwilling to surrender? In the face of Huang Song's tactful inquiry, Feng Ju was silent for a long time. He said faintly, "There's no other reason. I'm tired of it." Feng Ju said it lightly, but Huang Song felt that he had another meaning. However, Feng Ju was unwilling to say it clearly, so Huang Song could not force him. He sighed. "If you're tired of it, you can become a hermit and live a carefree life." No matter what, Feng Ju was the 3rd Langjun of the Feng family. As long as he did not deliberately seek death, Jiang Pingji would not touch him for Feng Jin's sake. From this point of view, Feng Ju was the safest among them. He could advance and retreat at will, so Huang Song did not have to worry too much. He and Feng Ju had known each other since they were young, so he had slowly come to understand the other's character. Feng Ju might look easygoing on the outside, but in reality, he was extremely arrogant. This kind of arrogance did not mean that he was arrogant. Instead, it was the way he handled things. Because Feng Ju learned and did everything easily, he gradually developed a personality that could not tolerate failure. Feng Ju had suffered quite a blow from this huge defeat. Huang Song also hoped that he could calm down for some time. Feng Ju said, "Has my lord really given up?" Huang Song was stunned, and he suddenly recalled the conversation between the two of them all those years ago. What if I lose? If the lord loses, I will accompany the lord to fight the Azura Hell again. There won't be another Lu Lanting there. When he thought of this, Huang Song's face suddenly flushed red, and he was almost too embarrassed to show his face. Feng Ju was not a person who cherished his life. He did not care about the lives of others, nor did he care about his own life. In the end, however, Huang Song signed an alliance with Jiang Pingji. He paid the price of not being able to become an official for 3 generations. He sacrificed his freedom in exchange for a night of promiscuity. Feng Ju must be very disappointed at this moment, right? Huang Song was not a person who was afraid of death, but he could not open his mouth to defend himself. Similarly, he could not explain his current actions. Huaijia, Huang Song spoke embarrassedly. He did not dare to meet Feng Ju's eyes at all. Feng Ju asked again, "Has my lord really given up?" This time, his tone was more serious than before. "Huaijia, it's not that I've completely given up, but is there a need to continue fighting in this situation? The winner is king, and the loser is the bandit. A loss is a loss. I, Huang Bogeo, am not a person who cannot afford to lose," Huang Song said awkwardly. "You and I have known each other for many years. How can you not know my ambition? If Lu Lanting can really pacify the world and end this chaotic world, so what if I submit to her?" If it were not for the fact that he was in a dead end, Huang Song would not have admitted defeat so easily. However, the outcome had been decided, and he did not want to fight anymore. Hearing this, Feng Ju's eyes darkened, and there was another period of silence. After a while he said, "In the end, it's all my fault." Huang Song was dumbfounded. He thought that Feng Ju would reprimand him, but he did not expect the topic to change and put the blame on him. What did this mean? Feng Ju refused to explain. That year, the Dongqing royal family moved the capital to Qinzhou, and Huang Song had a stage to show his skills. Although it was Yang Si who schemed against Huang Song and caused him to lose the trust of the Dongqing emperor, Feng Ju also added fuel to the fire. Huang Song's ambition could be said to have been raised by Feng Ju. He only cared about himself and forgot what Huang Song's original goal was. Feng Ju did not give Huang Song a chance to ask. He bowed and said, "I have made up my mind. My lord, please take care of yourself in the future." Huang Song could not tell what he was feeling in his heart. He only felt powerless and sad. His movements quickly reached Jiang Pingji's ears. She also knew the choices of the people. Those who were willing to submit, she would only accept them after an assessment. Those who were not willing to submit, Cheng Jing and Feng Ju, really don't know what's good for them. A general muttered in a low voice, feeling indignant for Jiang Pingji. As soon as he finished speaking, he was glared at by a few people. He was so scared that he did not dare to make a sound. The people who glared at him were not bystanders. They were Wei Xi, Yang Si and Han Yu. They were the big shots of the advisors. How could the newly promoted small general dare to offend them? The 3 of them were considered Cheng Jing's senior and junior brothers. Feng Ju was Feng Jin's 3rd brother. It was not easy to deal with any of them. Jiang Pingji rubbed her brows and said, "Leave Cheng Jing to Master Yuan Jing. Feng Ju will return a favor to the Feng family." She was responsible for the children she had taught. Jiang Pingji did not want to kill the 2 boys and offend Yuan Jing and Feng Ren. After all, she still needed them to help her perfect her education. As long as Cheng Jing and Feng Ju did not betray her, Jiang Pingji could let them go. Anyway, Cheng Jing had gone to Yuan Jing's side. It was impossible for him to be idle. When Feng Ju returned to the Feng family, the Feng family would keep an eye on him and not cause trouble for her. Everyone said, My lord is benevolent. The counselor could still find out what she was thinking. If others were a little slower, they would almost put her on the pedestal of benevolence. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Look, it was obvious that she was full of evil tricks. She was scheming from afar, but outsiders still thought that she was pure and righteous. She did not care about Huang Song's matters for now. Jiang Pingji was extremely busy. Previously, Huang Song's army was defeated. There were countless casualties, but there were even more deserters. If she left them alone, they would either starve to death or become bandits and harm the people. Jiang Pingji naturally had to deal with the aftermath. On one hand, she sent troops to capture them. On the other hand, she recruited troops and horses to trick them into coming back. Jiang Pingji had the most experience in dealing with these defeated troops. Chapter 1342. Jiang Pingji ran the army strictly, but the salary and pension benefits given to the soldiers were second to none among the feudal lords. She spent half a month dealing with this matter. In her free time, she would bring people out to survey the terrain of Changya to see if there were any areas that could be improved. Not only did she go alone, but she also brought Huang Song along. They are all busy. No matter how I think about it, only you are free. Jiang Pingji said calmly. She looked as if she was just talking about the weather. Huang Song was so angry that he was about to bleed. 20 days ago, he was still an opponent whom he had fought to the death with. Have you forgotten? Was he being scolded for being a freeloader? Jiang Pingji was wearing a loose robe with large sleeves. Her long sleeves were tied up with a bracelet, revealing her bare arms. Now that it was almost late autumn, Huang Song felt cold just by looking at her clothes. He couldn't wait to stay away from her. Jiang Pingji was wearing wide-toothed wooden clogs. Huang Song followed beside her. Behind her stood more than 20 guards with swords. They climbed to the top of a nearby hill, and looking down, they could see a continuous line of regular barracks. Right now, Changya is a desolate place. However, I heard that it used to be a county with abundant grain production. Jiang Pingji took a glance and ignored the guards' fearful gazes. She climbed onto the rock at the top of the mountain and stood higher to see further. Does Bogeo know about this? Huang Song's scalp went numb when he saw her suicidal actions. He immediately backed away to clear his name. He didn't want to be misunderstood as trying to murder Jiang Pingji. He reckoned that they would pounce on him and kill him before he could do it. I've heard a little about it. It's said that the rainwater flowed backwards and caused the plague, Jiang Pingji said. The terrain here is low. If there is a rare rainstorm, and the waterway is blocked, it will be easy for the river to flow backwards. The natural disasters in Dongqing were endless. Droughts and floods died. No one could guarantee that Changya would not experience a rare rainstorm again. If this place was to be developed, this problem had to be solved. If Changya could be managed well, it would become a major grain-producing county in the future. There was no such thing as too much grain. In this era, it was a blessing for farmers to suffer from cheap grain prices. The scariest thing was that there was not enough grain to eat. Huang Song glanced at her and asked, "What does Lanting plan to do?" Jiang Pingji said, "Divert the river water to nourish the fertility." Because the ancient tools were very backward, in order to make up for this, they had to send a lot of manpower and labor. According to the previous methods, Jiang Pingji recruited refugees from the vicinity and provided relief through work. Not only could it solve the security problems of the area, but it could also solve the livelihood problems of the people. At the same time, it would not delay the construction of various projects. Naturally, he would do the same to Changyi. However, Changya was a desolate and uninhabited place. Not to mention refugees, it was hard to even see a living person. If she wanted to develop the area, Jiang Pingji would have to transfer manpower from other places. This would be another expense, and it would take time to transfer people. I'm planning to sort out the uniforms. They were prisoners of war. But weren't they Huang Song's former troops? Jiang Pingji planned to absorb the young and strong prisoners of war, to expand the military camp. The rest would be left behind as labor. Of course, even if they were prisoners of war, Jiang Pingji planned to pay them, but the pay was only half that of normal labor. Once the construction was over, These captives could either stay and become residents of Changya, or they could choose to return home. Huang Song said, Lanting can make the decision. In his opinion, Jiang Pingji's methods were gentle and merciful. If it was in the past, when food was scarce, the prisoners of war would be killed. Prisoners of war could not be considered human beings. Their social status was lower than that of slaves. If Jiang Pingji disliked their gluttony, she could kill them here to save money. Not only would they be kept alive, but they would also be paid to work. They would even have the opportunity to regain their status as civilians in the future. Even Huang Song could not find fault with it. Jiang Pingji stayed on the mountain and watched the scenery for a while. Then she got up and jumped off the huge rock. Let's go back. It's getting dark. Everyone went down the mountain and returned. Just as they were halfway up the mountain, Huang Song accidentally stepped on something and almost rolled down. Jiang Pingji quickly pulled him up. Huang Song was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. Why did you step on nothing? There's something under my feet. Huang Song stepped aside and found a piece of blackened bone exposed where he had stepped on. Jiang Pingji did not care at first. When she looked down, she found a piece of green on the ground near the black bone. She got up and said to the guard, "Dig it out." The guard dug very deep. It took him a quarter of an hour to dig the headless corpse out of the mud. There was a seal next to the corpse. Jiang Pingji did not care about the corpse. She cared about the seal. Huang Song glanced at it and said, "This seal is of excellent quality. Looking at the carving and style, it seems to be from the early Xia dynasty." The Xia dynasty unified the Central Plains. The surrounding small countries succumbed to it. It was an era with an extremely prosperous economy and a luxurious atmosphere. This atmosphere also affected all walks of life. Many places carried the decadent atmosphere unique to that era. Even the seal that was commonly used by Taoists was more or less affected. Jiang Pingji said, "The early Xia dynasty? Taoism was popular at that time?" This seal came from the same source as the one that Wei Xi carried. Except for the different seal characters, it seemed to be cloned. Huang Song said, "Although it's not the state religion, it's much more likable than Buddhist monks." Buddhism was an imported religion. It was not a local religion. When monks were at their most domineering, they almost shook the foundation of the entire society. When Buddhism was first introduced, it was not acclimatized. After it gained a firm foothold, it was unstoppable. In order to avoid taxes and avoid military service, the people shaved their heads and became monks. Even though they became monks, their behavior was no different from that of ordinary people. In order to build temples, they occupied millions of hectares of fertile land. Most importantly, they did not pay taxes. They kept a large number of monk soldiers and used countless copper, iron, gold, and silver to build Buddha bodies. This seriously affected society. The period of the 16 Kingdoms was also the most prosperous and darkest period of Buddhism. After the establishment of the Xia dynasty, the founder of the Xia dynasty, under Prime Minister Huangfu's suggestion, exterminated Buddhism. He destroyed countless temples, confiscated millions of hectares of fertile land that was illegally occupied by the temples, confiscated hundreds of thousands of slaves, and ordered the illegal monks and nuns to return to secular life. In addition, he dismantled the bronze and golden Buddha statues. The materials were used to cast coins, farm tools, and weapons. He established strict rules to become a monk. After this battle, Buddhism declined, and Taoism rose rapidly with the support of the court. Of course, there were people among the people who said that Prime Minister Huangfu was a disciple of a Taoist temple in name when he was young. So he was especially close to Taoism. After Huang Song's explanation, not only did Jiang Pingji understand, but salted fish in the streaming room also understood. Tutifecio. It sounds like the three martial arts sect destroyed Buddhism? The Fairy Queen's crimson. I thought monks were kind and benevolent. I'm dumbfounded. Yi Zimu. The monks in the history of China were similar. Chapter 1343. The headless skeleton was poisoned to death. Huang Song sighed. Sigh, this brother is quite pitiful. Although it was unknown how many years had passed, one could still see the dark color on the bones. Even though he didn't know who the owner of the skeleton was, it was still quite a tragic ending. Jiang Pingji glanced at the skeleton. This skeleton is quite old. In short, it was not a corpse from this era. Looking at the seal on his hand, the owner of the corpse was probably from the Great Xia dynasty. Should we dig a hole and bury it? He died such a pitiful death. If even his corpse was abandoned in the wild, it would be too tragic. Jiang Pingji nodded. The guards dug a hole and buried the bones in the ground. Huang Song looked at Jiang Pingji in astonishment and asked hesitantly, "This seal, how should we deal with it?" It was best not to touch a dead person's belongings. Who knew what kind of dirty things were on them? Jiang Pingji said, "Zixiao has a similar seal with him. I'll let him take a look." "Oh," Huang Song replied, and did not continue to ask. The quality of the insight seal was very valuable. It would be a waste if he didn't take it. In any case, the owner wouldn't be able to settle the score with a living person. This could be considered a windfall. When they returned to the campsite, the sky was almost dark. Jiang Pingji turned off the streaming room and invited Huang Song to join her for dinner. Huang Song sighed. "Losing to Lanting makes me even more convinced." Jiang Pingji said, "Eating won't stop you from talking." Huang Song shook his head. He used to hear that Jiang Pingji's meals were the same as the soldiers. At that time, he thought it was impossible, but now he knew it was true. It was because of this that he felt so emotional. Most of Dongqing's land belonged to the north, and wheat cultivation flourished there. However, before the Great Xia dynasty, people didn't know that this thing could be ground into flour. Most of the time, it was steamed and eaten, and it was called wheat rice. Later, people discovered that wheat could be ground into flour and made into all kinds of pastries. Not only was he full, but the taste was also much better than the wheat rice from before. Even so, the agricultural technology was still immature. The cost of removing the bran from the wheat was too high, and the price rose accordingly. Ordinary people could not afford it at all. The processing of the wheat or other food that the common people ate was very rough. It was often mixed with gravel and small stones. To judge whether a person was born rich or poor, one could usually tell by looking at his teeth. Their teeth were neat and clean, which meant that they ate well, and could even wash their teeth and rinse their mouths. Their living conditions were naturally rich. Their teeth were worn and uneven. Most of them came from poor families. The food they ate was not carefully processed, so there was more sand and stones. The soldiers' rations had been millet porridge, or wheat rice before the 16 kingdoms, but now they were made from flour ground from wheat, and made into pastries and rice porridge. The sesame seed biscuit and steamed bun placed in front of him looked very exquisite. There was no trace of sand or stones, and it was also fragrant, soft, and delicious. As the Lord, it was normal for Jiang Pingji to eat more meticulously, but Huang Song saw that the ordinary soldiers ate the same way. What did this mean? This meant that the economy under Jiang Pingji's rule was very prosperous. Agricultural tools were developed, and ordinary soldiers could also eat delicately. By seeing one spot, one can see the whole leopard. Huang Song was naturally convinced of his defeat. Unbeknownst to them, Jiang Pingji's improvement and invention of agricultural equipment were almost equivalent to that of war equipment. Every year, she allocated a large amount of funds. Xiao Guang and Zhang Ping of the woodworking workshop received such a generous salary. If they did not give her something good, she would beat the two of them to death. If Jiang Pingji made a trip back now, she would find that the agricultural equipment in Wanzhou had been improved again. Bai Yuexia had been taught by the Mahists, and she was extremely talented. When the three technological experts gathered together, it was like lightning striking the ground fire. Inspiration burst forth wave after wave. After dinner, Huang Song took the initiative to leave. Jiang Pingji lit an oil lamp and read the documents for 6 hours. When she put down the last scroll, she heard Wei Xi's footsteps. As expected, Wei Xi sent her supper again. If it were not for the fact that she could not gain weight from eating, she would have become a pig sooner or later. Zixiao, look at this. Jiang Pingji took out the seal that she had picked up earlier and handed it to Wei Xi. She took the bowl and chopsticks that Wei Xi handed to her. This is... Wei Xi's eyes widened in shock. He subconsciously raised his hand to touch his waist. The Dharmachakra seal that perfected Liuru had asked Master Liaochen to give him was still there. How could the Lord have a similar one? My lord, where did this Dharmachakra seal come from? Jiang Pingji explained the details in detail. When he heard that the seal had been picked up near an unknown headless corpse, Wei Xi understood everything. He said solemnly, I'm afraid that corpse has a great background. Jiang Pingji asked, what background? I'm afraid it's the remains of Prime Minister Huangfu of the previous dynasty. Wei Xi said hesitantly, I also have one here. This was given to me by Jimren Liuru through Master Liaochen. According to Jimren Liuru, the seal used to belong to a Taoist layman disciple. That disciple was Prime Minister Huangfu of the Xia dynasty. There was a pair of seals. One was passed down to Jimren Liuru, and the other should have been buried with him. The seal was one of the tools that Taoists often used in religious ceremonies and ceremonies. It was a tool to make a living, and was used to invite the gods. Jimren Liuru had given Wei Xi one to suppress evil spirits. Now that another had appeared, he was getting more and more confused. Jiang Pingji said, why did that Jimren give you this thing? He could feel that the thing had a sense of righteousness. Because it was harmless, Jiang Pingji allowed Wei Xi to keep it close to him. Wei Xi shook his head. I don't know. Jiang Pingji said, if that's the case, you can take this seal too. She forced the seal into Wei Xi's hands. Wei Xi did not know whether to accept it or reject it. In the end, he could only accept it. After all, the seal was a burial object of the deceased. Wei Xi would not keep it close to him. He would keep it and put it on a memorial tablet to worship. Looking at Wei Xi's back as he left, Jiang Pingji's eyes looked dark and deep under the candlelight. The next day, Jiang Pingji received a battle report from Feng Jin. The messenger rushed over on a fast horse. He panted and said, my lord, we have won a great victory in Haozhou. Jiang Pingji opened the battle report with a calm expression. Huangsong's army had been captured. Haozhou's defense was very weak. Feng Jin had gathered 100,000 troops and pointed them at Haozhou. It was only a matter of time before they conquered it. Not only did she not feel happy, but she felt that Feng Jin's efficiency was a little slow. He was 3 to 5 days later than she expected. She was a little happy when she read the battle report. If Bogeo appointed his wife as a general, it might be a different situation. Although she is a woman in the inner residence, her courage and insight are no less than that of an ordinary husband. It turned out that when Feng Jin led his troops and was about to conquer the entire territory of Haozhou, Huangsong's wife, Qi Chaolan, led the troops she raised, the remaining soldiers, and the people to defend the last city. Faced with the great disparity in military strength, Qi Chaolan also knew that it was inevitable that the city would be breached. Therefore, she let a group of martyrs commit suicide on the city wall, to express their determination to die in glory, rather than live in dishonor. Seeing this, Feng Jin stopped fighting for a few days, and changed to besieging the city. Although the martyrs' suicide inspired the fighting spirit of the people in the city, Feng Jin besieged the city, but did not attack. There was a serious shortage of food in the city. Feng Jin even ordered the soldiers to sing the names of dishes at the foot of the city, every day to use food to sway the will of the guards. The two sides were in a stalemate for a few days. The people in the city could not bear the hunger. They gathered together and launched a riot. They forcibly broke through the city gate. Feng Jin led his troops and marched straight in, conquering the last territory of Haozhou. Qi Chaolan was captured. Chapter 1344. Long before Haozhou was conquered, the news of Huangsong's capture had spread. The news was undoubtedly a bolt from the blue for Qi Chaolan. Even though she was mentally prepared, she was still overwhelmed with grief. Her first reaction was not to follow Huangsong. Instead, she chose to take her child back to her parents' home, and beg her parents and brothers to take care of her. In the end, her father, who loved her dearly, refused to see her. Her mother looked at her, wanting to say something but hesitating. Her brother sighed and sent her off. Her mother said to her, "Your father said, the situation in Dongqing has been settled. Lu Shi probably won't make things difficult for you and your child, because of our past friendship. Chi Chaolan's eyes were dry. She said in an almost helpless tone, if Bogeo dies, Lu Shi won't make things difficult for you and your child, but their future is worrying. If father and mother are willing to take them in and raise them to become useful people, Bogeo's branch can also rise. If anything happened to Huang Song, as a woman in the inner house, she couldn't give her child the most comprehensive education. There would always be a male elder to supervise and guide them. She was also considered to be from a large family. The education within the family was comprehensive, so she wanted to entrust her child to someone outside the family for a few years. The reason why the gentry could maintain their pride for hundreds of years was because they controlled the educational privileges that ordinary people couldn't enjoy. Chi Chaolan didn't want her children to delay their enlightenment after Huang Song died. If they didn't become useful people, after 1 or 2 generations, Huang Song's branch would be completely destroyed. In addition, she was also worried that the chaos outside would hurt her child, so she wanted to hide in her parents' home. Unexpectedly, her mother looked conflicted and told her a cruel truth. Daughter, you also know Lu Shi's attitude towards the gentry. In the past, our family had close contact with Bogeo. It's hard to guarantee that Lu Shi won't target our family because of this. It's not that your father doesn't love you, but he has to consider the family's future, so he can't take in Bogeo's child. No one knew what Jiang Pingji's attitude towards Huang Song was. According to the idea of cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots, Huang Song's children might not have a good ending. Even if they could survive, they would be overrated to death. The structure of the chaotic world was chaotic. Some people fought hard, some watched from the sidelines, and some carefully found a balance between the two. The Qi family that Chi Chaolan belonged to was a typical example. They wanted to enjoy the benefits that came with prosperity, but at the same time, they did not want to bear the corresponding risks. Back then, Chi Chaolan's father had taken a liking to Huang Song at first glance, feeling that this young man had a bright future. Coincidentally, Chi Chaolan had also taken a liking to Huang Song, so her open-minded father acted as a matchmaker for the two of them. In the next few years, Huang Song did not disappoint his father-in-law. He provided him with many conveniences both openly and secretly. Unexpectedly, his father even refused his own grandson and granddaughter at the door. Chaolan, Chi said. Bogeo's Chaolan and Chi Chaolan is Chi. Chi Chaolan was already exhausted and could no longer hold on. Tears welled up in her eyes as she said, I'm only pleading with my parents to temporarily take them in. If Lu Shi really wants to vent his anger on me, I'll definitely bring the children back. I won't implicate my parents or my family. Even so, it still doesn't work. Although Chi Chaolan was the most pampered daughter in the family, her father was cold-hearted. A daughter that was married out was like water that was poured out. Chi Chaolan's father would not object if it was just to take in Chi Chaolan, but he would not agree to take in Huang Song's child. She didn't want to bring trouble to the family. Chi Chaolan's mother always listened to her husband. She was heartbroken by her daughter's complaints, but what could she do? Loner, go back first. I'll try to persuade your father. This was just an excuse. After hearing this, Chi Chaolan completely gave up. She brought the 3 children back to the house in an ox cart. Children are very sensitive. The eldest and second son are only 1 year apart, but they have been in education for 3 years. They look more mature than normal children. Mother, are we not going to see grandfather? Every time the children came with their mother, they would see their kind grandfather and grandmother. But now, they only saw their grandmother. Chi Chaolan said gently, Grandfather isn't feeling well. He doesn't want to pass his illness to you. You'll see him in the future. The 3 children were playing with the maids in the room when she talked to her mother, so they didn't know what happened. The second son said, Mother, the doctor in the house is very skilled. Why don't we let him take a look at grandfather? The 3 girls were only 3 years old. They were quiet and cute. They looked at their mother and 2 brothers with their black pearl-like eyes. She asked in a childish voice, Is grandfather sick? Chi Chaolan's tears, which had just stopped, threatened to burst again. If they didn't have children, she would want to live and die with Huang Song. But with children, she didn't dare to do so. Losing their father meant losing their protection. If they lost their mother, they could only live under someone else's roof and suffer. Chi Chaolan pulled herself together and let the 3,000 troops that she kept join the defense. She wasn't good at the art of war, but she was better than ordinary people. Unfortunately, the situation was hopeless. Her struggles were futile. Jiang Pingji passed the battle report to Huang Song. Huang Song was so anxious that he couldn't even speak properly. He bit his tongue several times. "How's the wife?" Jiang Pingji said. "Huai Yu is a careful and reliable person. He won't hurt your wife and children. They're very safe." Huang Song was still worried. As a man, he held the battle report with reddened eyes. He looked very sad and aggrieved. Jiang Pingji didn't react, but the audience in the streaming room couldn't take it anymore. Midnight eating yellow peach. Sob sob sob. I suddenly like Huang Song. Eat full. It seems that Huang Song and his wife have a good relationship. It's rare for an ancient man to be like that. Have strength to lose weight. I think that Huang Song's wife played a great role in pledging allegiance instead of committing suicide. Jiang Pingji comforted him. "Since you're so worried, I'll arrange for you to go to Wanzhou as soon as possible. Your wife will be sent there too." Huang Song asked. "What about you?" Jiang Pingji said. "There are too many things to do in Hu County, Haozhou and Qinzhou. I might not be able to go back before the new year." If the people who worked overtime heard this, they would probably be celebrating. They could finally have a good new year. Of course, Han Yu and the others wouldn't be happy if they heard this. Jiang Pingji had come up with a plan on how to govern Changya. It was up to Han Yu and the others to put it into action. "My lord, the accounts are ready." Han Yu handed a thick booklet to Jiang Pingji. To govern Changya, not only did they need people, but they also needed to make a good budget. For example, how much food could the laborers eat in a day? How much they would be subsidized in a month? How much they would be subsidized in a month? And how much they would be subsidized in clothes and fabrics. After all, it was almost winter. They couldn't just let them work in rags. Apart from these, Han Yu also calculated the daily work progress of so many people, and finally calculated the expenses needed for the whole governance process. The more detailed the accounts were, the more they could use every cent in the right way to prevent shoddy work, corruption, and favoritism. Chapter 1345. The war outside was in full swing, but the people in the rear were generally not affected much. In order to increase employment opportunities and reduce the damage caused by the unemployed in the country to public security, Jiang Pingji spent money to build more than a dozen official roads after careful study. Workers were provided with 2 free meals a day, and a certain amount of copper money was given according to the amount of work they did. A bolt of linen would be subsidized for 4 seasons of the year. If the workers could complete the construction of the entire road ahead of time, the participating workers could receive an additional 10 days of rewards. Not only could these official roads facilitate the deployment of troops during wartime, but they could also benefit the people in peacetime. For example, the people could transport their excess fruits and vegetables to other places to sell, increasing their additional income. In the past, it would take 10 days to half a month just to walk the mountain roads. By the time the farmers arrived at their destination with their fruits and vegetables, the goods would have long rotted away. Now it only took 1 day to arrive, and the fruits and vegetables were fresh. Jiang Pingji also encouraged women to work outside to support their families. In addition to physical labor such as building roads, she would also provide other jobs that were more suitable for women. Improving the status of women in society was not something that could be achieved in a short period of time. It would take a long time to reverse the stereotype. For example, she knew that some women were paid more for embroidery and weaving at home than their husbands who worked outside. However, the income of these women could only be described as supporting the family rather than supporting the family. Not only did others not feel that there was anything wrong with it, but even the women themselves felt that they were not the ones who supported the family. It had become the norm to take the initiative to put oneself in a weak position. However, with Jiang Pingji's strong rise, this natural atmosphere was being reversed. It was a good phenomenon after all. There were occasional disturbances along the way, but everything was moving in the direction she had expected. When the convoy escorting Huang Song and the others passed through the border of Wanzhou, everyone felt that the murderous atmosphere in the air gradually faded. It was replaced by a calm and peaceful atmosphere. Huang Song's anxious heart also slowly calmed down, and he began to carefully observe the scenery along the way. Huang Song was sitting in the carriage, reading with his head lowered. He heard the sound of an old ox, and a strange smell drifted in. He frowned slightly and lifted the curtain to look outside. He saw a couple following an old ox, one on the left and the other on the right. On the back of the old ox sat a girl in blue and white clothes. She carried a slanted bag on her shoulder. Huang Song thought they were parents and daughter, but when he listened carefully, he realized he was wrong. This man was a hunter from a village in Wanzhou. His childhood friend had been conscripted into the army and died on the battlefield 2 years ago. His childhood friend's wife became a widow with a little daughter, who was less than 4 years old. In the village was not easy to live. The man often helped her. After a while, the two of them fell in love with each other, and then they became husband and wife under Iceman's persuasion. The man also treated his childhood friend's daughter as his own flesh and blood. A while ago, he received news that his childhood friend's orphan had been selected to study at the Golden Scale Academy. The man was so happy that he couldn't sleep for a few days. As a matter of fact, the couple was preparing to send their daughter to the academy. Although she was a girl, those who had the opportunity to study in this era were all talented people. No matter how bad it was still better than selling physical labor. Everyone said that he was blessed. He raised this adopted daughter with all his heart, so he didn't have to worry that she wouldn't take care of him when he was old. He felt that it made sense. When he had his own children in the future, his children could also use his sister's book to learn a few words. Outsiders did not have such benefits. Huang Song had also heard of the Golden Scale Academy, but he hadn't paid much attention to it in recent years. He only knew that it was a private school for initiation. Now that he saw it, he felt that he was wrong. Huang Song lifted the curtain of the carriage and asked the man with a smile, "Big brother, are you going to the market?" When the man heard someone calling him, he turned his head and looked for a long time. Seeing that Huang Song's convoy was heavily guarded, he was so scared that his face turned pale. He said with trepidation, "No, we're sending our child to school." Huang Song asked them to come closer and talk. The couple were both ordinary people, so how would they dare to disobey? Sending your child to school? Huang Song glanced at the girl riding on the cow's back. She was nervously clasping the bag of her sling bag, her bright black eyes wide open. She wasn't considered cute, but she had the unique vigor of a child. It's not easy to go to school these days. It's expensive. The man tried to relax, and the guards guarding the carriage automatically made some space for the man to come closer. Our prefecture overseer is raising her, so it doesn't cost much. The man shook his head and said, "Sending her to school is also good to eat." The official in charge of selecting the children said that the children's meals, drinks, and accommodations were all free in the academy. They would even make clothes for free throughout the year. Huang Song pretended to be surprised and said, "Is there really such a good thing in the world?" The man said, "Of course there is. The girl from the family at the entrance of our village has already been in school for 3 years." Huang Song asked a few more questions in detail, and the man answered enthusiastically. Some of his answers were clear, while others were vague. After all, he was an illiterate hunter from the countryside. It was good enough that he could express what he knew in a simple manner. Huang Song changed the topic and asked a question that caught the man off guard. "Based on what Big Brother has said, could it be that someone is heartless and deliberately let their own child take the place of going to school?" It wasn't impossible for such a thing to happen. Some parents would very likely take the place of their relatives' orphans for the sake of their own children. The man was stunned and said angrily, "Which heartless person would dare to do that?" Huang Song smiled and said, "Everything is possible. Regarding this problem, does the prefecture overseer have any preventive measures? Since it was a pension, these benefits should really be implemented on the orphans of the martyrs." Otherwise, it would be very ugly if it was exposed. The man hurriedly waved his hands and said, "This won't happen. Who would dare to do this? Aren't they afraid of being haunted by ghosts?" Huang Song had doubts in his heart, but it was a pity that the man in front of him didn't know much and couldn't dispel his doubts. He didn't know that Jiang Pingji had never seen a person's heart as beautiful. When she first formulated these pension benefits, she had already considered all the aspects that could be considered. The military camp would send people to visit each family regularly. If the family that adopted the orphans showed signs of mistreating the children, not only would the family be severely punished, but the abused children would also be sent to a special place to be raised. Every child was recorded, so that it would be convenient for the Golden Scale Academy to select children of suitable age. Outsiders couldn't fake it even if they wanted to. Despite the huge amount of work involved, Jiang Pingji felt that these things were necessary. At noon, the sun rose high in the sky. The group finally arrived in Xiangyang district. As soon as they entered the city, the couple led the old cow to ask for directions. When the people saw the children on the cow's back wearing clothes, they immediately gave them directions enthusiastically. The chief who was in charge of escorting them said, "Are you going home directly?" There were only 3 people escorting them this time. One was Huang Song, the other was Cheng Jing, and the last was Feng Ju. They happened to be packed and transported to Wanzhou. Chapter 1346. Jiang Pingji simply waved her hand and let them return to their respective homes and find their mothers. Whichever family trained such a troublemaker would be punished. This was the safest method without offending anyone. Therefore, Huang Song returned home to reunite with his wife and daughter. Feng Ju was sent to Feng Ren's residence, and Cheng Jing temporarily stayed at his master's residence. Huang Song raised his eyebrows in surprise. "What return home?" The head of the count said, "I just received news that your wife has settled down in the city with a few Langjun and maidens." Huang Song's heart finally relaxed when he heard this. He couldn't help but reveal a relieved smile. "Okay, I'll go back now." When Huang Song arrived in Xiangyang district, Chi Chaolan had already stayed there with her children for 7 or 8 days. When she knew that her husband was not dead and would arrive to meet her in a few days, she almost burst into tears. Chi Chaolan waited for her husband to return happily, since he was out of danger. But, when Huang Song arrived at his new home, and the old housekeeper let him in, he found that his wife and children were not at home. "Where did they go, madam?" The old housekeeper said. Madam was worried about the 2 young Longjuan's studies, so she used her connections to look for a teacher. Who knew that she couldn't find a decent teacher in such a big Xiangyang district? Later, she found out that Master Yuan Jing and the other scholars were teaching at the Golden Scale Academy, so she brought Lang Jun and his wife to participate in the entrance examination. Huang Song came in not long after Chi Chaolan left. The couple missed their long-awaited reunion. Huang Song said with difficulty, "Send them to the entrance examination?" The old housekeeper said, "The Golden Scale Academy announced last year that they wanted to expand the number of students. In addition to the original fixed quota, they added an additional 50 places. As long as they are of the right age, they have the opportunity to enroll. To be fair, these students have to go through the examination. The original students of the Golden Scale Academy were the orphans of the fallen soldiers. Every year 200 students were enrolled. This year, the conditions were relaxed, and there were an additional 50 places. For these 50 places, a group of children competed fiercely, as if they were going to be evaluated." Huang Song frowned and said, "Lanting is really muddle-headed. How can you set this precedent at this time?" Except for a few second generations, Feng Yi and others, the students of the Golden Scale Academy were the orphans of the fallen soldiers. If there were other children with strong backgrounds or resources, wouldn't the gap between the students be widened? It was completely conceivable that the gap between the students would widen, and the atmosphere in the academy would definitely not be as good as before. Little did they know that Jiang Pingji, the fox, would never make a losing deal. She was willing to set the precedent because she wanted to bait them. If Huang Song knew the background of the students who were admitted, he would more or less understand Jiang Pingji's thoughts. Of the 50 spots, only 20 were obtained through their own abilities. The other 30 were mostly from wealthy merchant families, and were so poor that they only had money left. Among the scholars, farmers, merchants, the social status of merchants was the lowest. Even if they brought a lot of money to invite a teacher, the teacher they invited would only be an ordinary scholar. The truly famous scholars would not even bother to deal with merchants. Not to mention inviting them with money, he didn't even have the qualifications to enter their door. Jiang Pingji operated in the dark. She had her own plans. In the words of the livestream viewers, it was to attract investment, give those tycoons a little benefit, then reveal their true colors, and let them willingly fork out money to invest in the Golden Scale Academy's branch. How could they make a nouveau riche pay? Give them what they wanted the most. The merchants were rich, but they had no power, no influence, and no reputation. However, as long as Jiang Pingji spread the news and told them that the merchants who invested in the branch could hang the title of the honorary dean in the academy after the branch was completed, the officials would even come forward to commend them and give them a plaque. There were many people who were willing to fork out money. Of course, Jiang Pingji had also considered Huang Song's concerns. The recruitment this time was done in the name of celebrating the great victory. Next year, they would resume the previous recruitment routine. Huang Song asked the housekeeper, "Where is the Golden Scale Academy?" The housekeeper immediately prepared a carriage for Huang Song to travel, but it was blocked halfway. Seeing this situation, the housekeeper said embarrassedly, "Many merchants heard the news and stayed in the inn near the Golden Scale Academy. Therefore there are especially many people nearby. Master, why don't you wait a little longer? The patrolling soldiers will clear the way for the carriages and horses." Because of the enrollment expansion, the roads near the Golden Scale Academy were often blocked by traffic. Huang Song waited for a while, then he got off the carriage and walked. The old housekeeper handed the carriage to the coachman and followed Huang Song step by step. Sutra he had to follow him. Huang Song did not know the way. Why are there so many people? Huang Song's scalp went numb when he saw the crowd outside the Golden Scale Academy. Almost every student who came to take the exam brought a group of parents with them. There were also many maids and manservants who served them. They blocked the 7-feet-wide road in front of the Golden Scale Academy tightly. His heart ached when he thought of his wife bringing along 3 children and maids to endure the hardship. In fact, Huang Song imagined too much. As his wife, Qi Chaolan had a special status. She wanted to send her children here for the exam, so there would definitely be a green passage. To prevent the examinees from affecting the studies of the students in the academy, each examinee could only be accompanied by one parent. No manservants or maids were allowed to enter. Huang Song waited for a long time. Finally, it was his turn. The guard looked at him and asked, "Where's your child?" Huang Song said, "My wife has already entered with her child." The guard could only repeat the rules of accompanying the examinee. Examinees can only be accompanied by one parent. "Please wait for news at the inn outside." Huang Song widened his eyes in shock. He was stopped outside by a guard? No. Before Huang Song could finish his words, the guard said, "Next." The parent behind him said, "You're dressed quite extravagantly. Why don't you know the rules? Move aside. Don't block the way and waste time. My child missed the exam and can't enter the academy. What about your compensation?" Huang Song was speechless. 2 months ago, if you dared to talk to him like this, your head would definitely be smashed. Huang Song was squeezed out of the crowd with a gloomy expression. His clothes were messed up, and the old housekeeper was also dragged into it. "Master, there are too many people. Why don't we go back and wait for Madam?" Huang Song sighed. "That's fine." When he was about to return home, he saw a familiar figure standing at the door from afar. The other party was holding a lamp and looking out. "Madam." Qi Chaolan brought her child home. Hearing that her husband was back, she almost cried tears of joy. She originally asked the maids to wait for news at the door, but she couldn't sit still and simply waited outside. Hearing a familiar voice, she turned her head to look in the direction of the voice. "Bogeo." Before she could say 1,000 words, She was already in the other party's familiar embrace. After a long time, Chi Chaolon blushed and said, "This is the main street. I don't want to be a joke." Chapter 1347. As soon as the couple entered the house, Chi Chaolon couldn't wait to ask him if he was hurt anywhere, and if he had been neglected. Huang Song smiled as he listened to her nagging. He didn't feel annoyed, but he felt especially happy. "Lon, or don't worry. Everything is fine. Lanting has specially instructed me that no one will make things difficult for you." Huang Song waited for her to finish speaking before he gently caressed her hand. He knew that his wife had lost weight from the touch of her skin. She used to be plump and well-proportioned, but now she was thinner. He sighed softly and said, "I blame myself very much. I have to make you suffer with me in the future. I don't know what kind of situation we'll face," Chi Chaolon said angrily. "I married you because I like you. In your eyes, am I the kind of person who can share joys but not sorrows?" For her, the man in front of her had risked his life to come to her. This was already God's blessing. "Of course, that's not what I meant," Huang Song sighed and said. "It's just that, Lana, there are many despicable people in the world who add insult to injury. I don't think I've deliberately offended anyone. But it's easy to deal with a gentleman, but it's hard to guard against a despicable person. Who knows if someone will take advantage of the situation to step on you? You've always been proud. How can you bear such humiliation? I'm not worried about the present but the future." Huang Song was used to being looked down upon by others in his early years. After becoming a major force in Dongqing, he still had Jiang Pingji above him, who constantly made him feel pressured. There were hidden dangers internally and strong enemies externally. Huang Song didn't have much time to enjoy the happiness of being in a high position. The current situation was at most returning to the starting point for him. But it was different for Chi Chaolon. For example, he was stopped by the guards at the Golden Scale Academy just now. Before he could explain himself, he was squeezed out by the crowd. In the past, when he was in power, which guard would dare to do such a daring thing? For things like power and status, one yearned to have it when one didn't have it. When one finally had it, and enjoyed the convenience and superior experience that it brought, one suddenly lost it. The strong psychological gap could not be explained clearly in a few words. Huang Song's thoughts diluted the joy of reunion. His eyebrows were tinged with worry. Chi Chaolon was also affected by this, and her mood became slightly gloomy. She took the initiative to hold Huang Song's hand tightly and said in a low voice, "As long as you don't fall, this concubine is naturally not afraid." Huang Song lowered his eyelids and nodded slightly. The couple hugged for a while in the room. Chi Chaolon asked him, "I heard that Lu Shi isn't a good person. Why did he let you off so easily?" Huang Song briefly told Chi Chaolon about his pledge of blood with Jiang Peng. Chi Chaolon's eyes reddened as she listened. She knew what Huang Song had lost because of this. With his personality, he would rather commit suicide than lose these things. Chi Chaolon could guess why he was so willing to accept the restrictions of the alliance. "Don't think too much about it. It's better this way." Huang Song knew what she was thinking. He gently patted her forehead and said with a smile, "Lanting is not as heartless as you think." Regardless of whether it was because of their friendship or because of her own calculations, she still left him a way out. Chi Chaolon looked at him in confusion. "Husband, what do you mean?" Even if it was an aristocratic family with many years of accumulation, if 3 consecutive generations did not enter officialdom, even if they had a deep foundation to support them, their vitality would be greatly damaged. The Yuan family still relied on Huang Song's support. Now that Huang Song had fallen, it was unclear what the Yuan family's attitude would be. Even if Jiang Pengji gave Huang Song the title of hereditary heir for 3 generations, how could the salary support a facade that matched his status? 3 consecutive generations could not make ends meet. Even if there was a mountain of gold and silver, it would be eaten up. Should they be thick-skinned enough to snatch food from the mouths of the merchants? Huang Song said, "The alliance only says that 3 generations of male descendants are not allowed to enter officialdom. But you and I have more than one male descendant." Chi Chaolon was shocked. Could it be interpreted in such a way? At first, I didn't know what Lanting was up to, but I slowly figured it out during the journey. She really is not willing to suffer any losses. Huang Song smiled bitterly. Lanting has come to this stage. Whether it's to encroach on other countries or to defend Dongqing, the emperor's 12 crowns are indispensable. I'm afraid she's the first woman to ascend to the throne since ancient times. In troubled times, outsiders can ignore her being a woman. But once she establishes a country and proclaims herself as an emperor, some acute problems have to be brought to the surface. Qi Chaolan did not react for a moment. What problems? Huang Song said. For example, having children. Lanting has yet to have children. For a country, children were not as simple as an heir. They were also a stabilizing force that stabilized people's hearts. Without children, be it the court officials or the people, who could be at ease? If the emperor passed away one day without an heir, who would be the next emperor? The world, which had been stabilized with great difficulty, would be shattered in an instant. Qi Chaolan said. If she doesn't have children, she'll have one? The world is inherited by the heirs. Do you want the world that Lanting obtained to be a wedding dress for her husband's family? Huang Song asked her. Besides, as the emperor, she's above millions of people. How can there be a husband's family? If she has children, according to her temperament, most likely it will be inherited by the heiress. In this era, the Empress encountered far more trouble than ordinary male emperors. She was walking a path that her predecessor did not. So naturally, it was extremely difficult. Qi Chaolan said. Inherited by the heiress? Then the child's biological father. Huang Song looked down and said. Most likely killed. For her world, it's normal for a man to die. After listening to Huang Song's analysis, Qi Chaolan vaguely understood the calculations and implications behind this alliance. Bogeo, you mean she wants to support a woman? Huang Song said. This is inevitable. This will more or less reduce the pressure on the officials to choose an heir. Qi Chaolan said. In that case, this alliance is not only not a bad thing, but a good thing? If everything was as Huang Song had guessed, then Huang Song had worked hard, even if he didn't work hard. For the sake of these ties, his branch would definitely not be too bad. If their daughter worked hard and won the Empress's favor, she would definitely have a place in the imperial court in the future. Who would dare to belittle their family? After a while, Qi Chaolan said, She's really brave. Huang Song said. Actually, your husband is more inclined to Lanting having a male heir in the future. Qi Chaolan pretended to be angry and said, Why? Are you looking down on women? Chapter 1348. In the eyes of the people, an emperor who was diligent was a good emperor. In the eyes of the officials, an emperor who was healthy, smart, serious, and had a long lifespan was a good emperor. A woman's pregnancy was a job that could not be replaced by others. The heir of the country had to be born by the Empress herself. What accidents happened during childbirth? Dystocia, hemorrhage, suffocation of the child, death of the mother. The emperor that they had raised for more than 10 years was gone just like that. How much pain would the officials feel? In her previous life, Jiang Pingji was obstructed by so many officials. The most fundamental reason was not that they thought it was bad for a woman to be the empress. After all, the devil sitting at the top had fought his way out of chaos. How could the officials care so much about the succession of the royal family? The reason why they objected was for the sake of the stability of the country. Changing emperors frequently was harmful. Medical technology in ancient times was not advanced enough. Many children would die prematurely if they had a headache or fever. It was dangerous and time-consuming for the empress to give birth. The efficiency of childbirth was also a flaw. She had never considered it before, but the problem was in front of her. She had to consider it. Qi Chaolan thought about it seriously. The problem that Huang Song mentioned was indeed difficult to solve. Then, she was about to speak when Huang Song interrupted her. Her temperament is like this. As long as she's around, no one can change her mind. No matter what outsiders said about the daughter, would Jiang Pingji listen to them? Huang Song was also happy to watch the show. If the daughter was really set as the heir, he would benefit from it. There was no reason for him to object. Qi Chaolan said, Today we should also make thorough preparations. The preparation she was talking about was naturally to raise her daughter like a son. The education that she should receive must not be neglected at all. Huang Song nodded and suddenly thought of his two sons' examination results. He had suffered for the entire afternoon. If the two boys did not pass, wouldn't it be embarrassing for him? What's the result of the entrance examination of Jinlin Academy in the afternoon? Qi Chaolon smiled and said, "This Jinlin Academy is far better than what the outside world says. Even the family schools of the noble families can't compare to it." Initially, she wanted to be thick-skinned and plead with her parents to at least let her child attend the clan school, so as not to delay his enlightenment, who asked her to not be able to find a decent teacher in the entire Xiangyang district. When she visited the Golden Scale Academy by chance, she was moved and insisted on sending her child here. The two children worked hard. Their brains were better than their father's, and they easily passed the entrance examination. Huang Song was surprised. That good. The gentry clans all revered the clan's school, and they rarely looked at the private schools outside. However, his wife was full of praises for this private school, the Golden Scale Academy. Qi Chaolon explained the difference in detail. It was good for the clan to have good academics, but the atmosphere was also bad. Most importantly, some of the children of the poor families in the clan could still go to school. Dragons give birth to dragons, phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, and the son of a mouse can dig holes. Children from poor families always had some disgusting habits. Some didn't like to study, and liked to form gangs to bully others. No matter if it was knowledge or upbringing, they could never compare to the children of the clansmen, who had been brought up by a particular family. Because of these reasons, the teachers of the family would rarely be strict with their students. Naturally, the bad habits of the children could not be quickly corrected. Lady Qi had just learned that the children of the Golden Scale Academy were the orphans of the fallen soldiers, so she was somewhat reluctant. After taking a closer look, she realized that what she saw was very different from what she had imagined. If one didn't get to the bottom of the matter, who would know that those adorable and well-mannered children in the academy all came from commoner families? She didn't know that the Golden Scale Academy was now implementing full-time education. Except for a few second generations, who could attend day school and had special privileges, most of the children were in school. There was also an additional language etiquette course in the curriculum. This change was made because someone found that the children used the unbearable words, f*ck your mother, to scold others during arguments. Where did he learn this vocabulary from? Naturally, it was learned from the quarrel between the neighbors when the children went home to live temporarily. Although it was a small matter, for those great scholars who regarded the Golden Scale Academy as their painstaking effort, it was naturally disgusting. The great scholars who were deeply rooted in the theory of lineage thought that it was the children's lineage that was causing trouble. A hot-tempered scholar lost his temper on the spot. He deeply felt that the Golden Scale Academy should not recruit students from commoner families. The academy provided the best education. Which headmaster of the academy was not a famous scholar with a reputation outside? With such abundant resources, even a sow could bow and salute. But the students they taught actually scolded people. f*ck your mother? Hopeless. However, Master Yuanjing felt that the children's lineage was not the most important. The most important thing was the influence of the environment around them. To teach children well, they should isolate the harmful environment and work hard to create an atmosphere suitable for learning for the students. If not, why would Mencius's mother move 3 times? Master Yuanjing's combat power was indeed not just for show. He alone suppressed all the opposing voices. Due to Master Yuanjing's status in the education world, the great scholar could only bear with it. The group of people discussed urgently again and finally finalized the rules. The children who entered the academy could stay at home for 7 days and half a year, a semester. The parents could visit the children for half a day every month to avoid alienation. If there were special matters at home, they could ask for temporary leave. In addition, the students must live in the academy for a long time. After 1 or 2 years, The atmosphere was indeed better than before. The children studied seriously, and the great scholars who had some grudges were satisfied. Those nitpicky great scholars with obsessive-compulsive disorder could be satisfied. So naturally, Lady Chi was also satisfied. Yes, so I let the children take the exam. And in the end they even got 2 places. The only thing that made Chi Chaolan reluctant was the academy's boarding system. The parents could only see the children once a month, which made it seem like a visit to a prisoner. Huang Song smiled and said, "You are indeed the child of Lan'er. You are indeed capable." Chi Chaolan rolled her eyes at him in amusement. Aristocratic families generally raised their daughters well. Although the teaching was also strict, the content was biased. If they wanted to have the right to train their daughter to become an official, the matter of enlightenment should also be put on the agenda. The couple was worried about this matter. In the end, Huang Song thought of a solution. He threw his daughter to Fengju. Fengju was speechless. Did he think he was a master? Huang Song was not a fool. He knew that Cheng Jing was sent to Master Yuanjing's side. He would most likely be arrested. Fengju was thrown to his father Feng Run. He still had the same temperament. He was definitely an idle person. When he had nothing to do, he would raise his daughter. If Fengju knew his thoughts, he would definitely want to beat him to death. However, Huang Song's acting skills were comparable to Jiang Pingji's, and Fengju felt a faint sense of guilt towards him. In the end, he still became the teacher of Huang Song's daughter. Both father and daughter are worrisome. Fengju let out a long sigh. Teach the child to pass the time. Huang Song's analysis was not unreasonable. If he trained his daughter here, she would still be able to do well in the imperial court in the future. Don't let the master down. Patting the 3-year-old girl's head, she nodded seriously. Chapter 1349. If it was said that Cheng Jing and Fengju's refusal to become officials and pledge allegiance was understandable, then Nie Sun's choice was puzzling. Although Nie Sun's illness was serious, he was still very young, and his recovery ability was naturally not weak. After a period of nursing, he was more or less recovered. While Nie Sun was recuperating, Feng Jin had also tried to sound out Nie Sun's intentions. He didn't know if Nie Sun didn't understand the hint, or if he pretended not to understand, but Nie Sun didn't express his stance on the recruitment. If he didn't take a stand on this matter, it would mean that he had tactfully rejected him. Feng Jin could not understand what was so good about Huang Song that Nie Sun was willing to bet everything on him. According to his understanding of Nie Sun, he was not a stubborn person. Otherwise, why would he plot against Yuan Xan? Feng Jin hadn't been able to convince Nie Sun, so he simply sent Nie Sun back to Wanzhou to wait for his lord to recruit him. The lord was Nie Sun's cousin. What couldn't a family member say directly? Unexpectedly, before Nie Sun could see Jiang Pingji, who was leading the troops outside, he first saw another relative whom he had expected. On this day, Nie Sun heard that Huang Song and the rest had already arrived in Xiangyang district. His wife, Zhu Qingning, carried their child and sat beside him silently. "Cheng Yin, do you want to see that person?" While coaxing the child, she stared at her husband who she had lost and found. Ever since she received Nie Sun's letter, she hadn't had a good night's sleep. Sometimes she had nightmares, sometimes she had palpitations. In just a few days, she had become extremely haggard. Her parents were so worried about her that they gave birth to a lot of white hair. Zhu Qingning saw this and felt very uncomfortable in her heart. When she heard that her husband was fine, she felt relieved and started counting with her fingers to calculate when Nie Sun would return. When the husband and wife reunited, she, who was as meticulous as dust, discovered that her husband had something on his mind, and he became much quieter. She did not dare to ask more questions. She could only ask Nie Sun to be more kind to the child every day, hoping that the child would cheer him up again. "It's better not to see him. He probably doesn't want to see me either." Nie Sun lowered his eyes. Why add to the awkwardness? Zhu Qingning was startled after hearing this, and her movements of holding the child stiffened a little. She seemed to have never thought that the relationship between Huang Song and her husband Nie Sun would become so bad. When did this happen? "Cheng Yin, if you have something on your mind, why won't you tell me?" Zhu Qingning's eyes were filled with hurt and sadness. You and I. Before he finished speaking, light footsteps could be heard from outside. A figure was kneeling outside the paper door. Master, madam. Someone outside the door has sent in a visiting card and mentioned your name. He hopes that Master can meet him in person. When the two of them heard the maid's voice, they could not help but frown. No matter who the visitor was, it was basic etiquette to pay a visit and send a greeting card. However, it was up to the host to decide whether or not to meet the visitor. No matter who the visitor was, the other party didn't have the right to name who he wanted to see, and it was rude of the maidservant to pass the message without permission. Nie Sun was naturally displeased with this kind of behavior. He scolded lightly. When did you become so unruly? The maid outside the room stammered. The person who handed over the visiting card used a carriage with the emblem of the Liu family. He has been waiting outside the mansion for almost an hour. Housekeeper tried to persuade him, but the other party insisted on seeing Master before leaving. Housekeeper had no choice but to send this servant over to report. Zhu Qingning frowned and said, "What a rude visitor. How is this a visit to the host?" It was clearly an unruly guest, who came forcefully to act like a hooligan. Even if the other party's carriage had the emblem of the Liu family, Zhu Qingning did not think that her husband would be ordered around by the other party, and had to show up. However, Nie Sun frowned and analyzed in his mind. In the end, he fixed his thoughts on someone. In this Xiangyang district, there were only a few people who were qualified to use the carriage of the Liu family. The identity could be determined by elimination. It was either Lu Shi or Lu Zhao. The first two were outside, so the only possibility left was Lu Zhao. However, he had no interaction with Lu Zhao. Why did the other party make such a scene? Nie Sun said, "Let the distinguished guests wait in the flower hall for a while. I will go over after tidying up a little." There were rules when meeting a guest. Nie Sun slightly fixed his appearance to ensure that he looked energetic before he went to meet the guest. He thought that the unruly guest was Lu Zhao, but through the screen in the flower hall, the figure faintly revealed had the unique charm of a woman. It wasn't Lu Zhao. Could it be Lu Shi? However, Lu Shi was still a virgin and had a tough character. Since when did he have such a graceful figure? In terms of age, it didn't match. Within a few steps, Nie Sun had already made countless judgments in his mind. All the inferences pointed to one person. When he walked around the screen, their eyes met. That instant palpitation confirmed Nie Sun's guess. Even if they hadn't seen each other for more than 20 years, the blood in their bodies had always existed. Nie Sun stopped in his tracks. For a moment, he didn't know whether to advance or retreat. He just looked at the person with a complicated expression. This person was none other than Nie Sun's biological mother, Lu Shi's second wife, Gu Zhen. After Gu Zhen was welcomed into the flower hall, she felt as if she was sitting on pins and needles. She was extremely anxious and looked in the direction of the room from time to time. The handkerchief in her hand was almost torn by her. When she saw Nie Sun, she recognized his identity at a glance. She suddenly stood up from the seat. Her eyes were filled with tears and bloodshot. She clenched the handkerchief in her hand even tighter. Gu Zhen's lips moved and trembled. She couldn't say a complete sentence for a long time. You are. Zhu Qingning was also curious about the identity of this unwelcome guest and followed them. He didn't expect the other party to be a charming and beautiful woman. When she saw Nie Sun, she completely lost her composure. She staggered forward and touched Nie Sun's face with her trembling hands. Her fingertips couldn't help but rub the bright red cinnabar mole between his eyebrows. Zhu Qingning held the child in her arms. She first looked at it with a dumbfounded expression. Then she was so angry that her chest felt stuffy. She didn't mind the beautiful woman's actions, but her husband's action of not dodging or avoiding her made her a little jealous. Zhu Qingning took the initiative and called out softly, "Qingyan, this is?" Gu Zhen was brought back to her senses by her voice. She slightly lost her composure and used the handkerchief to press away the tears at the corner of her eyes. She turned to look at Zhu Qingning. "I heard you." Gu Zhen didn't know how to address Nie Sun at that moment. Through the two letters that Meng Heng handed over, she knew that Nie Sun already knew about his family background. However, she didn't explain and recognize him. This lady is Master Yuanjing's 5 daughters? Gu Zhen's gaze fell on the swaddling clothes in her arms again. Although there was a certain distance between them, she felt that she had returned to the delivery room many years ago. She tried her best to give birth to the child in her womb. Before she fainted, she only had time to take a look at the child, before she was carried away by the midwife. Although it was just a glance, she didn't stop recalling it for so many years. When she saw the child in the swaddling clothes, she seemed to see her son from back then. Gu Zhen couldn't help but say, "This child's facial features are very similar to Qingyun's when he was born." Zhu Qingning was slightly embarrassed by Gu Zhen's words. She didn't expect Gu Zhen to have seen Nie Sun when he was a child. She was jealous just now. Why did Madame Lu visit the residence today? Chapter 1350. Gu Zhen mumbled as if she was afraid of angering Nie Sun. "I heard that you came to Xiangyang district, so I dropped by to take a look." Although she said it was along the way, anyone with a discerning eye could see that she put a lot of thought into her outfit. In order to make her complexion look better, Gu Zhen specially put on delicate makeup. She had a good foundation. She had taken good care of herself over the years, and dressed up carefully. She looked like she was only 24 or 25. No wonder Zhu Qingning misunderstood. Nie Sun sighed. "Madame Lu, you've seen me." Gu Zhen's face turned pale. Nie Sun only said half a sentence, but the rest was definitely an excuse to chase her away. "You don't want to see me that much?" In a trance, she felt her heart ache so much that she couldn't breathe. Zhu Qingning broke out in a cold sweat for her. Nie Sun said, "It's not that I don't want to see you, but you and I are not the same kind of people. What can I do even if I see you?" The calmer his tone was, the worse Gu Zhen felt. Her tears that she had finally stopped broke down instantly. "How can we not be the same kind of people?" Gu Zhen grabbed Nie Sun's shoulders with both hands and cried with her head down. "Do you know what happened back then was what I wanted? Every time I think of it, I want to cut Meng Zhan to death. If it wasn't for him, how could we have been separated for so many years?" As a legal wife with no status, she was indeed useless. She couldn't protect her son, and let him be cheated on by a concubine. He almost died on the cold ground, and was trampled by thousands of people before and after his death. Gu Zhen hated him too. How could she not? Nie Sun didn't acknowledge her, and she didn't force him. But why didn't he even give her a chance to make it up to him? Zhu Qingning felt more and more upset as she listened. Her eyes were filled with suspicion, and she peeked at her husband secretly. "I know all of this, but what can I do? What should have happened has already happened," Nie Sun said. "Madame Lu, let it go. You can just assume that the baby boy was buried alive and died. I'm the adopted son of Zhongjia's Nie family, not Meng Zhan's second son." To Nie Sun, the kindness of raising him was far greater than the kindness of giving him life. Gu Zhen was pitiful, but did Nie Sun deserve it? His life was not only brought about by the woman in front of him, but she also missed out on more than just a son. Apart from being related by blood, how were they different from strangers? He did not owe Gu Zhen, and Gu Zhen did not owe him either. There was no point in trying to make it up to her. Nie Sun was willing to treat Gu Zhen as an elder, but he could not force himself to adore her like an adoptive mother. The relationship between parents and children was not something that could be determined by blood. Zhu Qingning listened to their conversation and realized that the Mrs. Lu in front of her was Lu Shi's second wife, her husband's biological mother. At this time, the daughter in his arms also cried. Babies could not care less about adults. They would cry if they wanted to, regardless of the occasion, place, or time. When Gu Zhen saw this, she immediately held back the sobs in her throat and wiped the tears on her face with a handkerchief. She did not care about her ruined makeup. Zhu Qingning touched it and said in a low voice, "He probably peed. This concubine will call the wet nurse over. Is Madame willing to help look after him?" Of course, Gu Zhen could not ask for more. When the unique milky fragrance of a baby wafted into her nose, the tears that she had stopped with great difficulty gushed out again. The baby girl in front of him was the daughter of that child. Time passed so quickly, Gu Zhen did not know whether she should be happy or sad. Nie Sun was helpless with his wife's actions. He had wanted to directly cut off Gu Zhen's thoughts. It was enough for the two families to maintain a superficial friendship. There was no need for them to have a deep relationship and talk about relatives. Gu Zhen lowered her head and coaxed the child. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito, as if raising her voice would make Nie Sun unhappy. In the face of such a situation, even a rational person like Nie Sun could not help but feel sympathetic. His calm heart was in chaos. I have no intention of forcing you to acknowledge me. I just want to see if you are doing well, and if there is anything I can help with. Gu Zhen spoke in a submissive tone. The more she acted this way, the harder it was for Nie Sun to be forceful. Nie Sun said, I am very well. Gu Zhen said in a pleading tone. Then can I come over to see this child often? Nie Sun said. I'm afraid it will be inconvenient. Gu Zhen's face turned completely pale. It was as if someone had stabbed her heart with a knife. Zhu Qingning came over just in time to hear these two sentences. She rolled her eyes at her husband. Why did he only say half of what he wanted to say? She said, Does Madame Lu like this child very much? Gu Zhen knew that Zhu Qingning was her daughter-in-law. Unfortunately, her son could not recognize her, much less her daughter-in-law. Of course I like him very much, Zhu Qingning said. If Madame Lu likes him, I will bring the child to visit your residence when I am free. Is that all right? Nie Sun's expression changed, but he did not interrupt her. Gu Zhen nodded hurriedly, and could not contain her joy. How can this be considered a visit? If you come, you can stay here permanently. Qingyun's current identity is a little. In order to prove his innocence, it is naturally not appropriate to make it public. Visitors to the residence will be pushed back as much as possible. Madame Lu, don't take his words to heart. That is his temperament. Zhu Qingning said with a smile. Let the wet nurse bring the child away to change first? After hearing Zhu Qingning's words, Gu Zhen felt much better. She faintly looked forward to it. She handed the child to the wet nurse who had been waiting for a long time. After some thought, she took off the bracelet on her wrist. I came in a hurry today, and did not bring any greeting gifts. I saw that the child was fated with me, and I liked him very much at first sight. Gu Zhen let Zhu Qingning accept the greeting gift on behalf of the child. She said humbly, This bracelet has been with me for many years. It is quite old. Please don't dislike it. Zhu Qingning had good taste. Naturally, she could see that Gu Zhen's gift was really good. Since it was a gift from her grandmother to her granddaughter, she did not stand on ceremony and accepted it, lest she made the other party sad. She watched reluctantly as the child was carried away by the wet nurse. Gu Zhen only retracted her gaze when the child was out of sight. I also know Lanting's temperament. If it is because of this matter. Nie Sun knew what she wanted to say and flatly refused. No. Gu Zhen could only swallow the rest of her words. Zhu Qingning saw that the atmosphere, which had eased with great difficulty, was stiff again. He felt helpless. Then why? Nie Sun said directly. I have no intention of becoming an official again. Why? Gu Zhen did not seem to expect such an answer from him. She could not help but ask. Could it be that Lanting is unwilling? Nie Sun was Jiang Pingji's biological cousin in name and by blood. They were a family. It was not to say that they were completely biased, but they would secretly take care of each other. Huang Song had already been defeated. What was wrong with Nie Sun, as an old official, choosing a new master to assist? Nie Sun looked down and said, No, it is my own reason. No matter how terrible Yuan Xian was, or what disagreements he had with Nie Sun, the only person who could deal with him was Huang Song. However, Nie Sun had bypassed Huang Song and plotted to kill Yuan Xian. No matter what his reason was, at the end of the day, it was also a betrayal to Huang Song. At the same time, it was also the most taboo action of a person in a high position, who would not be disgusted if officials killed each other because of personal disagreements. When Nie Sun made up his mind to kill Yuan Xian, he had already made a decision. If Huang Song won, he would resign from Huang Song and live in seclusion. Chapter 1351. After that day, Zhu Qingning kept his promise, and often brought his daughter to visit Gu Zhen. Gu Zhen was naturally overjoyed. Nie Sun's attitude remained the same. No matter how Gu Zhen tried to please him, he had no intention of softening. This made Zhu Qingming extremely puzzled. What's wrong with Qingyun? Zhu Qingming sighed. Today, she told me what happened in the past. She really has her difficulties. Nie Sun was reading a book in the courtyard. His expression was calm. Zhu Qingming approached him with a smile and curled up into a ball in his arms. Disturbed by his wife's childish behavior, Nie Sun could only free one hand to hug her and the baby in his arms tightly. Zhu Qingming used a gentle voice to slowly recount what he heard and sighed at the end. Qingyun, there are all parents in the world. She really has her difficulties. Can't you be a little more soft-hearted? After all, Nie Sun was the person who slept with him. Zhu Qingming understood him the best. There was one thing that she did not understand. He was obviously kind to Gu Zhen on the first day, but he became cold after a few days. Wunyang, the hearts of people in this world are not as simple as you think. You are so innocent and gullible. How can your husband rest assured? Nie Sun hugged her with one arm and rested his chin on her shoulder. His voice was a little tired. According to what you said, she did have her difficulties back then. But speaking the truth doesn't mean that she didn't hide anything. It's good for you to bring the child to visit her in the future. Just don't connect me with her anymore. Nie Sun's temperament was different from ordinary people because of his childhood experience. His adoptive parents had no children and treated him like their own. He was also grateful, but this did not mean that he had forgotten his childhood memories. That memory would not fade even when he was old. That year, he was dug out from the soil. After a few hands, he was sold from Dongqing to Zhongzhou. Someone bought him to ask for a child. The mistress was hot-tempered and violent. She often scolded and beat him because she felt humiliated when she saw him. His existence constantly reminded her that she could not have a child. In the cold winter, the woman pressed his head into the water. The more he struggled, the harder she used. When he was 3 or 4 years old, he simply held his breath and pretended to be dead. The other party threw him into the water and left while scolding him. Of course, this couldn't be the end. Not long after he became a child beggar, he was targeted by a trafficker who specialized in abducting and selling child beggars and sold to the next family. He had met all kinds of people. Someone had taken a fancy to his face and bought him into a men's establishment. If the place had not been burned down, Nie Sun would not have been able to escape. Someone purely had the hobby of torturing young children for physical pleasure. He had broken his arms and legs, and the little finger of his right hand was still stiff. His body bore the scars of his childhood. Some of them had healed long ago, while others were still stubbornly present. Nie Sun was a tenacious person. If he didn't want to die, he naturally wouldn't die. Everyone had parents, and so did he. Where were his parents? Did they have no choice but to sell him because their family was poor? Or did they encounter a great change that caused him to be kidnapped by human traffickers? He wanted to understand. This obsession kept him alive. At that time, Nie Sun probably didn't expect his parents to be so noble and unattainable. If he had known earlier, perhaps he wouldn't have had to suffer so much. It would have been better to bang his head against the wall and beg for an afterlife. Why? Zhu Qingming turned her head and kissed him on the cheek, interrupting his memories. Now she still acted like an innocent young girl and said coquettishly, "Qingyun, you should at least tell me the reason. You're always unwilling to explain, and others will misunderstand that you're an unfilial son." Nie Sun smiled bitterly. He didn't say it because he didn't want his wife to know. You'll know when you pay attention to eldest sister-in-law's situation. Zhu Qingming didn't understand. What does this have to do with eldest sister-in-law? She really didn't understand. This was clearly a knot between Nie Sun and Gu Zhen. How did eldest sister-in-law get involved? Nie Sun looked down. Zhu Qingming placed the child in the sleeping basket at the side, held his right hand with both hands, and kissed his little finger. You're always like this. Nie Sun felt that his hair was about to go bald from worry. He was at his wits' end when it came to his wife. If you don't want to be like this, then explain. You also know that if you don't explain clearly, I won't understand sometimes. Nie Sun had no choice but to mention a few words in her ear. The smile on Zhu Qingning's face instantly froze. This, Nie-sun said. Wenyang, if it's possible. I really want to bring you back to see my parents and tell them that I'm married. Zhu Qingning only came back to her senses after a long while and said, My actions these days. Aren't they making things difficult for you? Nie-sun whispered. As long as it's you, it's not difficult. As the end of the year approached, Jiang Pengji let some people return to Wanzhou first. Meng Heng was one of them. When he arrived, he couldn't wait to see his wife and child. The smile on his face was more like a child's. His wife wiped his sweat and said angrily, You've traveled a long way. Aren't you afraid that the child will be dirty? Go wash up and then kiss him. Meng Heng could only obey. He took a comfortable bath and changed into new clothes. He asked about the situation at home, and his wife told him everything. Is Chengyan being taken care of? Meng Heng asked. Although the two brothers didn't acknowledge each other as relatives, Meng Heng felt guilty towards Nie-sun. After all, they had schemed against each other, and now it was time to make up for it. His wife wanted to say something but stopped. Meng Heng asked her, What's wrong? Is there someone making things difficult for Chengyan? No, it's just. But what? Meng Heng ate some pastries to fill his stomach while he looked at his wife with concern. His wife twirled her handkerchief in a dilemma. A while ago, mother-in-law went to the manor to visit second brother and sister-in-law. She didn't have a good time. Meng Heng wasn't surprised. This is in line with Chengyan's temperament. If they were to acknowledge each other and have a family reunion right away, Meng Heng would feel that Nie-sun had been possessed. His wife recounted the events of that day once more. She and Zhu Qingning were close friends and sisters-in-law, so there were some topics that were not taboo. The two sisters-in-law had the same opinion. They were both mothers, and they always felt that Nie-sun was too cold. Meng Heng listened and clicked his tongue. After so many years, she still has the same temperament. His wife lamented. Brother-in-law indeed had a hard time in his early years, but there's no lack of parents in the world. How can he be so cold-hearted? Meng Heng said, Mother, if you continue like this, Chengyan's heart will only become harder and colder. His wife was dumbfounded. Mother-in-law treats him so well. It depends on the situation. Mother has been in Wanzhou for a while, not to mention sending people to the manor. Has she ever asked about you and the child? His wife was stunned and said, That she hasn't. Not only had she not, she had once brought the child to the manor to pay her respects, but the maid had said that he was already asleep. Later, she and her sister-in-law, Zhu Qingning, went to the manor together and met her mother-in-law for the first time. She was really beautiful, and it was hard to tell her age. Meng Heng sighed. I told Mother that Chengyan is still alive. How long has it been? His wife still didn't understand, and Meng Heng wasn't in the mood to explain. After all, it wasn't right to speak ill of his mother in front of his wife. Was Guzhen a good mother? To Lu Shi, she was probably the best mother in the world. Not only was she good with her words, but she was also good with her actions. To the two brothers, she would always be good with her words, and she would only tell others how good she was. Before Meng Heng wrote to Guzhen, she didn't know that her youngest son was still alive. On the surface, Meng Heng was her only son. But what was her attitude toward her eldest son? He lived in the Meng residence as a son of a concubine, and was constantly on guard against his father's concubines. In order to save himself, he was willing to become a hostage and live in Shangjing. The Meng residence basically didn't give him any expenses, and he had to pawn a few items from when he was 1 year old to barely make ends meet. He studied in a private school and had a high cultivation level. While studying, he sold his calligraphy and paintings to earn some pocket money. Once, he wrote a letter full of hope to his mother, hoping that she would take pity on him and take care of him. Guzhen took care of him and sent him 100 taels of silver. Other than the money, she didn't say anything. At that time, Meng Heng already had a sense of honor. His face was burning as he held the money his mother gave him. The boy servant said, Madam, did you think that Lang Jun was begging her? Meng Heng, who was 11 or 12 years old, felt that his pride and dignity had been shattered by his mother. He begged for this money. He begged for his birth mother's care and love, And in the end he got money. Meng Hung got married at 23, and it was because the elders of the Meng family couldn't bear to watch it anymore, and betrothed him to the daughter of a branch of a declining aristocratic family. Did mother say a word or two about this? Before Meng Zhan died, he could say that the Meng family was powerful, and she didn't dare to ask for her son's sake. Now that Meng Zhan's body had been cold for a few days, she still ignored her eldest son, and treated her eldest daughter-in-law and eldest grandson coldly. She was such a mother, but she poured out her heart and lungs to her second son, whom she hadn't seen for more than 20 years. Nie Sun wasn't stupid. The more Gu Zhen wanted to make up for her second son, and treated him like heir, the colder he would be. Her eldest son had a mother-son relationship with her, but he was still so cold. Then what right did her second son, whom she hadn't seen for more than 20 years, have to deserve her love? Did she really want to get her son back and make up for the lack of motherly love? Or did she want to be forgiven to ease the guilt in her heart? Meng Hung felt that Nie Sun could see it clearly. His wife didn't know what Meng Hung was thinking inside. It wasn't easy for grandma in her early years. I heard that she was often bedridden. Can't you be more understanding? It wasn't easy for the daughter of the Gu family to get to where she was today. She doesn't want to take medicine to cure her illness. Can others force her? Meng Hung said. It wasn't easy. Maybe it was. His wife looked dissatisfied. How could her husband say that? Although mother was the daughter of the Gu family in her early years, her treatment was similar to that of the legal aunt. Otherwise, she wouldn't have married into the Meng family in the past. I asked some elders, and they said that the legal aunt treated mother really well. The people who were part of her dowry were all her confidants, and all of them were capable. Meng Hung said. After that she remarried to Lu Shi. Everyone in the Lu family respects her. Now the Lord has earned her the position of Empress Dowager. As her sons, it's best for us to maintain our current situation if it's for her own good. Chapter 1352. Because Nie Sun had told the truth, Zhu Qingning felt uncomfortable facing Gu Zhen. In order not to expose herself, she could only reduce the frequency of her visits to the manor. She did not stay for long each time. Zhu Qingning was also a woman who had been a daughter and a mother. She could tell what a mother who truly loved her child was like from her words and actions. It could not be said that this mother-in-law did not do a good job, but her kindness was only on the surface. It felt unreal. Gu Zhen did not know Zhu Qingning's thoughts. She had been worrying about Nie Sun's future. However, Nie Sun had been avoiding her. She could not have a long talk with him to remind him to teach him. She could only relay many things to her daughter-in-law Zhu Qingning. She brought up the past again today, hoping that Zhu Qingning could persuade Nie Sun to become an official. She more or less understood the knot in Nie Sun's heart. However, Nie Sun was Jiang Pingji's cousin. There were not so many taboos in the family. It would only take a few words to promote him. Zhu Qingning knew that Gu Zhen meant well, but her words were indescribably harsh to the ear. She did not think that her husband had to become an official. It was good to be a famous scholar with achievements in education. He could still be famous. If Nie Sun really wanted to become an official, he did not have to rely on his relatives. Her mother-in-law Gu Zhen spoke matter-of-factly. Not only did she belittle the wise Duke of Lanting, but she also belittled Nie Sun. Zhu Qingning was also a clever person. She felt uncomfortable, but she did not show it on her face. She pretended to mention Meng Hang's wife casually. Has sister-in-law been here these few days? A few days ago, she said that she had some new designs. She was thinking of embroidering a little dress for Nan Nan. Nan Nan was her daughter's nickname. Every time she called her, she would look over curiously. She was very cute. Gu Zhen heard her mention her eldest daughter-in-law. She teased her granddaughter and laughed. She doesn't like to come. Maybe there are many rules in the manor, and she is not used to it. Zhu Qingning heard some dissatisfaction from her mother-in-law. Women who knew how to fight in the house were clever. Her words seemed plain, but there was actually a hidden meaning. Zhu Qingning understood the meaning behind her mother-in-law's words. She despised her sister-in-law for being of low birth and not knowing the rules. She probed further and came to the conclusion that Nie Sun's words were true. This mother-in-law's attitude towards her eldest son was too cold. Of course, this indifference could also be brushed off by saying that her daughter-in-law was of low birth, and the eldest grandson she gave birth to was not pleasing to her. Mothers-in-law always had special privileges. It was reasonable for her to vent her anger on her grandson and son, because she didn't like her daughter-in-law. From then on, Zhu Qingming went even less. However, Gu Zhen liked to let her carry the child and chat with her. Gradually, Zhu Qingming realized that this mother-in-law was becoming more and more like a mother-in-law. Although he didn't do anything to her, his words and attitude were much more forceful. This kind of toughness was not conscious. It was completely unintentional. Niesun said, "Go accompany mother-in-law or help father-in-law write the letter. I'll help you send her away. Every day, she goes to pay her respects before dawn. My heart aches for her." He had always been a fickle and rational person. If others treated him sincerely, he would return the favor with sincerity. In the beginning, he was also moved by Gu Zhen. However, after calming down and looking at her attitude towards his elder brother and himself, his warm heart turned cold. He could treat her as an ordinary elder, but he really couldn't force himself to be a loving mother and a filial son. Zhu Qingming said, "Mother-in-law won't be angry because of this, right?" She had been married to Niesun for so long, but she had never played the role of a daughter-in-law. However, when she was in the boudoir, she had heard how difficult it was to serve a mother-in-law. "What's she angry about?" Niesun said, "The Duke of Lanting will be back soon. I reckon he won't be in the mood to care about us." If Niesun was a little more stupid, he would probably be moved by Gu Zhen's actions. Unfortunately, he was too perceptive and saw things too clearly. Jiang Pingji was scheduled to return after the new year, but the construction work outside was on the right track earlier than expected, so she returned early. That day happened to be the 25th of the new year, the day the Golden Scale Academy had a half-year holiday. It was rare for Niesun, the homebody, to go out. The entire Xiangyang district was immersed in a sea of celebration. Various shops also imitated the reception house and introduced discount activities. Those who don't know would think it's the new year. Niesun chuckled. His smile didn't reach the bottom of his eyes, but there was a bit of absent-mindedness in them. Perhaps this is what the people want. Zhu Qingming looked at the young general, who was riding a horse slowly in the distance. He was like the unruly and unrestrained youth in Langya's Pear Blossom book. Jiang Pingji did not change back into her female clothes. She was still in her military attire. She looked mighty and extraordinary. Who knew how many infatuated men and resentful women she had provoked? Zhu Qingming leaned against the window and rested his chin on his hand as he lamented, "My foresight back then was really not bad." Niesun felt that something was wrong. "What foresight?" Zhu Qingming chuckled and joked. "One year during the flower festival, my father intended to choose a husband for me. I took a fancy to her at first sight." "Niesun? Who? Which little demon?" Zhu Qingming said, "My father said that the Duke of Lanting and I were not compatible and refused to tell me the reason. Later, I found out that the ideal man was a girl." "Niesun? Yaya." The little girl in his arms spat out a big bubble. When the bubble burst, she secretly rubbed her saliva on her father's clothes. Zhu Qingming smiled mischievously. "Langjun, are you jealous of this?" Niesun took a deep breath and waved his hand weakly. "I don't care about women." Whether the woman referred to Zhu Qingming or Jiang Pingji, it was up to the benevolent and the wise to the wise. The return of a portion of Jiang Pingji's troops was a major event that shook several prefectures. Feng Zhen and the others were so angry that they gritted their teeth. She did not even let people celebrate the new year in peace. Was their lord not sincere? They cursed in their hearts but smiled on the surface. How infuriating. Did anything major happen while I was away in Wanzhou? Even though Jiang Pingji's energy was frightening, and she had ridden a horse for a long time, she still looked tired. Overall, she was in good spirits. Naturally, there was nothing. The rear and front lines had maintained a certain frequency of communication. If something had happened, she would have known long ago. However, Suka said, "The first madam is here. She is now living in her residence in the main city." "The first madam? Aunt Shu is here?" She called Gu Zhen Aunt Shu out of habit. She realized that Meng Heng was also among the welcoming party, so she calmly changed the way she addressed her. Mother's health isn't good. She can't get used to taking those medicines. Her condition hasn't improved. Why isn't she in Chongzhou under father's care? Why did she come all the way to Xiangyang? Su Ke said. The first madam heard news about Nie Chunyan and specially rushed over to meet him. Su Ke was also aware of the entanglement between Meng Heng and Nie Sun. Jiang Pingji calmly replied, "Oh, you've met him?" Su Ke said with emotion. The first madam has a motherly heart. It's just that Nie Chunyan has been avoiding her. Jiang Pingji did not even bat an eyelid. Based on Su Ke's words, Gu Zhen would not be leaving anytime soon? Jiang Pingji sighed and said, "All these years, I've been fighting all over the place and haven't had much time to reunite with my family. As a child, I feel very guilty. Since mother is also in Xiangyang this year, I should organize this year's New Year's banquet well. I can't let mother make a long trip and leave with regrets." In the large Lu residence, if there was anyone Jiang Pingji was most unwilling to act with, it would probably be Gu Zhen. She did not know how to evaluate this woman. She was the first to discover that Lu Shi had been possessed. Her reaction was also the calmest. The system had once asked why the second madam could calmly admit her identity when she discovered that something was wrong. She had also said that it was because the two of them had reached an agreement. What agreement? She allowed the second madam to enjoy the so-called Great Transformation. She would inherit Lu Shi's legal identity. Chapter 1353. To some extent, Jiang Pingji and Nie Sun were the same kind of people. She seemed unreasonable because she was too rational. In the eyes of outsiders, Gu Zhen was a competent stepmother. She wrote many letters to ask about her well-being almost every year. If it wasn't Jiang Pingji but someone else, they would have been touched by her, and their hearts would have been warmed. Jiang Pingji was an exception. She didn't mind others describing her as heartless. No matter how much Gu Zhen cared for her over the years, her heart was never warmed, because she knew very well that she and Gu Zhen were just plastic flowers. It looked good, but it was fake. What was real couldn't be fake, and what was fake couldn't be real. Gu Zhen knew in her heart that Jiang Pingji was not the Lu Shi she had raised. How sincere was her concern and concern? Did Jiang Pingji look like a child who lacked calcium since childhood and grew up without love? Gu Zhen wasn't related to her at all. How could she sincerely treat someone else's family as her own? If she was really touched and fell headfirst into it, that would be really stupid. Her relationship with Gu Zhen was at most an ally. She gave Gu Zhen a great creation, and Gu Zhen helped her hide her identity. They both took what they needed and hit it off. How much true feelings could they have without this deal? Jiang Pingji didn't show it on her face. She tilted her head and listened to everyone's report, but she couldn't help but yawn in her heart. After listening, she said with a serious face, "We'll be busy before the new year. Please pay more attention, and try to stop writing, and rest as soon as possible." Qiguan rang, and the other old foxes couldn't help but twitch their mouths. They looked like they knew it. Yangxi and the others were even bolder. They couldn't help but roll their eyes. It was the same thing every year. The trick was old and nothing new. Every year, they were tired of it and applied for a new trick. Even Hanyu, who had just joined for a year, couldn't help but sigh. He had been fooled once. How could he be fooled a second time? He didn't know that Jiang Pingji thought this trick could be played until she retired. She planned to work overtime every day during her reign. How could her subordinates get annual leave? Haha, that's impossible. After the meeting, Jiang Pingji was ready to take some people out for a tour. She had been in charge for so many years. She wouldn't feel a sense of accomplishment if she didn't take a good look at the changes and progress in her territory. Lord! Everyone left one after another. Only Qiguan Rang had something to report, so he stayed behind. Jiang Pingji asked, Lady Takshu is still locked up and waiting for my lord's punishment, Qiguan Rang said. Do you want to go and take a look, my lord? She's a poor woman too, but who asked a pitiful person to have a hateful side. In any case, we used to be master and servant. I'll send her off to fulfill this friendship. She stood up from her seat, flicked her sleeves, and said to Qiguan Rang, Wenjeng, let's go and take a look. Qiguan Rang reminded her worriedly, Lady Takshu is a little strange. My lord must not get too close to her. Takshu's appearance was not considered top-notch, but her captivating eyes were somewhat evil. Many soldiers had been affected by them previously. Jiang Pingji said, Of course I know she's weird. I wanted to let her go at first, but who knew she'd come looking for death? At first she thought that Takshu was a double agent. However, she later realized that she was a triple agent. On one hand, she was instigated by the main system. On the other hand, she listened to Lu Shi's orders. At the same time, she was the spy that the time traveler had placed in the Lu residence. Of course, this last identity was to cover up the other two. Takshu probably did not know that there were so many big shots behind her, nor did she know what they were using her for. Jiang Pingji thought that was probably Takshu's limit. However, after careful investigation, she realized that she had missed one person. The reason why she had missed this person was that Jiang Pingji was too conceited. Now that she thought about it carefully, there might be other developments. Takshu, long time no see. Takshu had been locked up by Qiguan Rang from one small dark room to another, that was even more heavily guarded. She had not seen the light of day for a long time. Her skin had become deathly pale. She had also lost a lot of weight. One could almost see the blue blood vessels buried under her thin skin. She had dark circles under her eyes. It was obvious that she had not slept for a long time. Fatigue was written all over her face. When the small dark room opened, the sunlight from outside shone straight in. It made Takshu, who had not seen the light for a long time, feel extremely uncomfortable. She raised her hand to block the sunlight in front of her eyes, and watched Jiang Pingji walk against the light. He Lang Jun. Takshu was no longer as docile as before. Her gaze was a little murky and fierce. When she thought of the sufferings she had suffered in the past few days, her hatred for Jiang Pingji increased. Jiang Pingji said, Lang Jun? I heard from Wenjeng that you didn't say that before. Takshu said in a strange tone, You're just a lonely soul. Of course, I'm not calling you. My poor Lang Jun, your nest has been occupied by a dove. It's hard to say whether it's a dove occupying a magpie's nest. Jiang Pingji crossed her arms in front of her chest and laughed. On the contrary, all of you are scheming against me. Did I dig up your ancestral graves in my previous life? Or did I go disco surf on your graves? Do you really think I'm easy to bully? Even though so many years had passed, Jiang Pingji still remembered the details of when she had just transmigrated. There was a question that had been overlooked, but it was still a mystery. How did Lu Shi die? According to the system, he knocked his head. He was frightened by the bandits and had a high fever. He could not swallow his last breath and died. This explanation was reasonable, but Jiang Pingji felt that something was wrong. When she woke up in Lu Shi's body, his body temperature was normal. In other words, the time between her arrival and Lu Shi's death was very close. The future world's definition of death was spiritual death, where one's spiritual power would completely dissipate. As a big boss who had reached the limit of her brain, Jiang Pingji was naturally very sensitive to spiritual power. Even though she was still weak at that time, she did not find any traces of Lu Shi's spiritual power. It would take half an hour for his spiritual power to completely dissipate. Half an hour was enough for his body to cool down. There was a contradiction between these 2 points. Unless someone took away Lu Shi's soul before she regained consciousness. If that was the case, many clues would become clear. This was also one of the reasons why Jiang Pingji suspected that Lu Shi was still alive. The two of them did not hide their conversation from Qiguan Rang. When Jiang Pingji admitted it, his hand that was waving the fan paused for a moment, then returned to normal. Takshu, if you can cooperate and answer a few questions of mine, I can let you go. Takshu sneered. Do you think you can buy people's hearts this way? Even if you kill me, it will take me to the Elysium. I don't know if there's an Elysium in this world. I only know that those who plot against me will die under my sword sooner or later. Not to mention that she did not do anything. Even if she really dug up someone's ancestral grave in her previous life, and went disco surf on their graves, The enemy would not be able to capture her without putting up a fight. Chapter 1354. Who doesn't know how to brag? I just hope you won't be scared silly in the future. If her master had not stopped Takshu from making a move, she would have found a way to do something to her. How would she have allowed her to be so presumptuous? Jiang Pingji said, I'm not afraid of being scared silly. I'm afraid that the enemy will be the first to be scared silly. Taksha clenched her teeth tightly. She refused to reveal any information about the main system. A demon like you who possesses a body won't have a good ending. Don't waste your energy. I won't betray God. Taksha thought she was tight-lipped. But how did she know that Jiang Pingji really did not get anything out of her? Even so, Jiang Pingji still had to praise the main system's ability to brainwash people. She sighed and said, if the thing behind you is willing to use this brainwashing ability elsewhere, I guess all the creatures in the world will become its most loyal believers. People will not dare to go west. When that time comes, will there still be a situation where the feudal lords are divided? They would have been unified long ago. Why was the Red Lotus group so rampant back then? Why was it easier for religious doctrines to spread in troubled times? Because the people did not have the courage to face reality in troubled times. They were more willing to entrust their souls to faith. Let me give you an easy-to-understand example. The poor people were powerless to change their fate. Faith would tell them that they suffered in this life because of the sins they committed in their previous life. As long as they paid off this debt of abuse in this life and accumulated merit, they would be rich and happy in their next life. If they did not settle down in this life and did not pay off the sins of their previous life, they would continue to suffer in their next life and would not have a good ending. In the face of such threats, the people who had no ability to distinguish would naturally be shocked. That was the horror of brainwashing. Jiang Pingji really did not understand. The main system had the ability to hide from her for nearly 10 years. Its ability was naturally not comparable to that of the good-for-nothing system. If it was so capable, it could roll up its sleeves and fight. Why did it have to push out a puppet that could not do anything but spoil things? If it brainwashed the people in the world, how could the other feudal lords fight? They could not achieve their goals after scheming for so long. What was the other party trying to achieve? On second thought, the system was secretive about the dimensional patrol merchants. Perhaps the main system was also afraid of its natural enemy and had no choice but to cower? Thinking of this, Jiang Pingji gloated. In the face of such merciless mockery, Taksha's pale and bloodless face was flushed with anger. She glanced at Qiguan Rang, who was standing behind Jiang Pingji. Anger flashed in her eyes. He knew that Jiang Pingji was an evildoer who had been possessed by a wandering spirit. Yet he was indifferent? Sure enough, she had been controlled by that demon's seductive sorcery. Takshu, you have to think this through. To me, if you're not willing to cooperate with me, then you're worthless. I don't have the slightest bit of patience for worthless people. Jiang Pingji pulled out the god-slaying sword with a smile. The snow-white blade exuded an icy aura. Are you really not afraid of death? Taksha looked at the knife in Jiang Pingji's hand in horror. The blade was right next to her neck. If she moved a little closer, she would be able to cut a wound. If you really wanted to kill me, would you still be talking so much nonsense? Jiang Pingji leaned close to her ear and whispered, do you really think I can't bear to part with it? You seem to think too highly of yourself. Taksha smiled sinisterly. Kill him then. Oh, Jiang Pingji responded. The sound of a sharp blade piercing through flesh was heard in the air. The smile on Taksha's face froze. She lowered her head slightly. The long knife had directly pierced through her. Jiang Pingji had a sense of propriety. She ensured that Taksha would definitely die, but she could also let her linger on for a few breaths. Do you really think I don't know anything? Jiang Pingji breathed into Taksha's ear. Her lips opened and closed as she spat out a name. Taksha's eyes widened in shock when she heard it. Finally, she breathed her last unwillingly. She died with everlasting regret. Jiang Pingji straightened up. The long knife in her hand slid out of Taksha's flesh. The strong smell of blood permeated the air. Why did you kill her, my lord? Qiguan Rang asked. She's worthless. It's impossible for her to be used by me. Is it a waste of food to keep her alive? Qi Guanrang was speechless. When he came into contact with Taksha previously, she kept saying that Jiang Pengji was a wandering spirit that had been possessed. Qi Guanrang had long been mentally prepared. Therefore, he calmly accepted this fantasy setting. Can you reveal your original name, my lord? Jiang Pengji said. Qi Guanrang said honestly, it's not as good as Lu Shi's. Could he say that his lord's name sounded like a certain new dish in the guest house? The pan chicken. He had this wicked thought, but he did not have the guts to say it out loud. Jiang Pengji said, a name is just a code. Whether it's Lu Shi or Jiang Pengji, they're both called by others. Qi Guanrang smiled and said, my lord is open-minded. Although the saints always talked about supernatural powers and gods, the people were still very respectful of ghosts and gods. They also believed in the existence of ghosts and gods. As an ancient person, Qi Guanrang naturally could not jump out of this fence. He asked, my lord, there's something I don't understand. Jiang Pengji said, ask away. Qi Guanrang shifted his gaze to Taksha's corpse on the ground. He wanted to say something but stopped. Jiang Pengji knew what he wanted to ask. She simply said, I don't know how I woke up from Lu Shi's body. The situation was critical at that time, so I didn't think too much. Later, through clues, I discovered that someone was manipulating everything in the dark. According to the preliminary information, the other party is very ambitious. Not just the whole world, but I'm afraid they want to plunder the fate of the whole human world, or the fate of a country. The concept of fate was illusory. Anything that was related to the country must be related to millions of people. When Qi Guanrang heard this, he frowned and looked at Jiang Pengji with a worried gaze. She waved her hand at him and said, that thing seems to be afraid of something. It doesn't dare to come out and hurt me directly. At most, it can play tricks. Qi Guanrang said, my lord, please deal with it carefully. Everything is for your own sake. Jiang Pengji laughed and said, Wenjing's reaction is really interesting. If an ordinary person knew that I'm a wandering ghost of unknown origin, they would be scared out of their wits even if they don't rush to find a master or an eminent monk to kill me. I feel uncomfortable that you accepted it so easily. Qi Guanrang said, is my lord an evil person? Jiang Pengji shook her head. Although I'm not considered a good person, I can't be considered evil either. At least I have a clear conscience in the things I do. Qi Guanrang said, then is my lord an evil spirit? Jiang Pengji smiled and said, if an evil spirit sees me, I'll turn around and run. Qi Guanrang said, if that's the case, why should I be afraid? So what if my lord is an evil spirit? Wars are everywhere, and the people have no way to live. The gods in the sky don't care about the lives of the common people. Instead, evil spirits come out to uphold justice. So what if we worship evil spirits as our masters? The gods and Buddhas don't care about the lives of the living. Evil spirits come out to unify the world and return peace to the people. Chapter 1355. Qi Guanrang's straightforwardness made Jiang Pengji smile. She said, Wenjing, are you willing to be my right-hand man in your next life? The angelic Qi Guanrang fell silent. He frowned as if this was a difficult decision for him. It was obvious that a promise could make Jiang Pengji happy. This life was this life. Who knew that in the next life, Qi Guanrang would put on a serious expression. He sighed. Is it not enough for you to be a slave in this life? Do you want me to be your slave? Jiang Pengji was speechless. Look at you. What did I do to you? Do you want me to be your slave? Can you plow the fields or pull the cart? Qi Guanrang thought about the mountain of work that piled up every day. He couldn't help but grieve. I misspoke. I'm worse than a slave. Jiang Pengji was speechless. She had only stood him up for 7 to 8 years of annual leave. It didn't even add up to 2 months. He was really resentful. Qi Guanrang said, if there's a next life, Rang should be more careful. I can't sell myself for a few hundred taels of silver. Why did Qi Guanrang fall into Jiang Pengji's trap? Wasn't the fuse a few hundred taels of silver? Jiang Pengji was as evil as she was now. She saw Qi Guanrang's potential and bought him for a few hundred taels of silver. Mr. Wei is looking for a son-in-law, but Wenjing has no assets. Which do you want to cut? At that time, Qiguan Rang was ordered by his teacher to travel thousands of miles to Hejian County to visit Wei Yuan. He wanted to use his connections to see if he could get an empty position in the officialdom. He was considered an official now. Whatever opportunities he had in the officialdom would depend on his own abilities. Unexpectedly, Wei Yuan's backyard was ruined by Meng Liang's friends. Wei Yuan's eldest daughter was unfortunately affected and lost her chastity. Wei Yuan was worried about his eldest daughter's marriage. He took a liking to Qiguan Rang. Before he could test Qiguan Rang, two uninvited guests climbed over the wall. It was Jiang Pingji and Feng Jin's appearance that completely disrupted Qiguan Rang's original life trajectory and arrangements. Once they met, it would be a lifelong mistake. It had nothing to do with romance or romance. Now that he thought about it, it was still vivid in his mind. It was impossible to organize a decent wedding without money, even with his father-in-law, Wei Yuan, secretly subsidizing him. Qiguan Rang was still struggling to make ends meet. Jiang Pingji's actions at that time could be described as profiting from a burning house. In the end, Qiguan Rang boarded the pirate ship. His gaze was warm. Back then, he would never have imagined that the person in front of him would be able to walk so far. Send someone to clean up the body. He sheathed the god-slaying saber and said, "It's getting late. Do you want to go to the reception house for a meal?" Qiguan Rang thought that Jiang Pingji wanted to visit incognito, so he nodded in agreement. Under Wei Si's management, the reception house had opened up throughout the territories under Jiang Pingji's rule. The prices of the food there were targeted at the middle and high income groups. Almost every wealthy family would order a few tables for their weddings and funerals. Naturally, business was good. It was the favorite place of the old Taodai. Jiang Pingji also generously made the recipes for home-cooked dishes, and some dishes that didn't cost much to make public, in order to not squeeze out ordinary restaurants and pubs. She differentiated the customer groups to minimize the phenomenon of competing with the people for profits, so that the people could also benefit from it. This method was indeed effective. It greatly increased the flow of people in the surrounding areas. Many merchants liked to open shops near the reception house. Gradually, the prototype of a business circle was formed. The reception house could be considered one of the original contributors to the prosperity of Xiangyang district. The reception house was one of the programs for compensating the families of the fallen soldiers. At the same time, it was also the place where corruption and mistakes were most likely to occur. This program had always been managed by Wei Si. Even if Qiguan Rang was worried about Wei Si, he had to admit that Wei Si did an excellent job. Not to mention corruption and mistakes. One had to use a magnifying glass to look for flaws. "Zixiao, you're doing well, right?" Jiang Pingji booked a private room and said with a smile, "The reception house's business is good." Qiguan Rang said, "It's more than good. After settling the accounts last year, the net income was 2 million strings of coins. A net profit of 2 million strings of coins. After deducting various costs, it was considered a huge profit. He really didn't know where so many gluttons came from. Not to mention chaotic times, even in prosperous times, it was a monopoly that the court feared. Other than the reception house, Wei Si's storytelling team also earned a lot. On the surface, the benefits were not as good as the reception house, but the hidden value was terrifying. Wei Si relied on the manipulation of public opinion to turn thousands of people into Jiang Pingji's diehard fans. Other than promoting Jiang Pingji crazily, Wei Si also used storybooks to expand the contributions of the female soldiers. He issued official documents of honorary family to every female soldier's family. Who wouldn't be excited when a family whose ancestors were peasants were singled out and praised by the officials? Official documents still used paper as a carrier. In the eyes of ordinary people, their status was equivalent to an imperial edict. This move indirectly improved the status of women among the people. Even the number and frequency of female babies being abandoned were greatly reduced. The more capable Wei Si was, the more Qiguan Rang was afraid of him. However, he had a discussion with Jiang Pingji previously, so he could only observe Wei Si in secret. Earning 2 million strings of coins a year, Wei Ci was a business genius who was held back by overtime and the Lord. Jiang Pingji said, Wenjing, aren't you curious why Zixiao is so loyal to me? Qiguan Rang waved his fan and said unhappily, There must be something wrong when something is out of the ordinary. We have to guard against it. Wei Ci was indeed too strange. Jiang Pingji said, Wenjing, do you know where I come from? Qiguan Rang shook his head. Other than knowing that his lord was called Depanji, no, Jiang Pingji, he didn't know anything else. However, thinking about it, he knew that his lord was so outstanding now. She must have been a dragon among men in the past. Jiang Pingji said, I come from the future 20 or 30,000 years in the future. Qiguan Rang was dumbfounded. The fan in his hand hit his face with a slap. What? 20 or 30,000 years in the future? Jiang Pingji said, I trust Wei Ci so much because he was my lover in his previous life. In this life, he must have forgotten to drink Meng Po's soup. Qiguan Rang was speechless. He prided himself on being smart. But he actually didn't think of this? Jiang Pingji was vague about the main point. She successfully made Qiguan Rang think that Wei Ci also came from 20 or 30,000 years in the future. She didn't lie. At most, she didn't say it completely. Using history as a mirror, we can see the rise and fall. Does my lord know about the future? Jiang Pingji shook her head. She really didn't know. Even though Jiang Pingji was a poor student of liberal arts, she knew that the historical process of this world was different from that of her world. The relevant historical records were all buried in the chaos of war. No one knows what happened in ancient times. Jiang Pingji said, It's okay if you don't know about history, because I will create my own history. Perhaps this is my responsibility for appearing here. Qiguan Rang's expression was somewhat blank. Chaos of war? Chaos of war again? Will there be chaos of war 20 or 30,000 years in the future? Chapter 1356. Jiang Pingji suddenly dropped a big bomb on Qiguan Rang, causing him to collapse. He couldn't be bothered with Wei Ci anymore. He desperately wanted to know what the future world would be like. Although many novels said that ancient people had low IQ, that was not the case. Their ability to accept things was surprisingly strong. The ignorant ancient people always liked to explain things they didn't understand with supernatural means, which was why there were so many myths and legends. To Qiguan Rang, the contents of Jiang Pingji's narration were the means of a deity. However, immortals relied on their own abilities to soar through the clouds, while the people of the future relied on technology to do things that even immortals could not do. After a brief description, Qiguan Rang immediately became interested in the word technology. He asked, In that case, isn't the woodworking workshop the prototype of technology? Jiang Pingji nodded. This is also the reason why I strongly support Zhang Ping, Xiao Guang and the others. A person's imagination and creativity are limitless. Qiguan Rang sighed. If that's the case, Rang doesn't feel distressed about the hundreds of thousands of strings of money allocated every year. How many people were there in the workshop? Including Zhang Ping, Xiao Guang, and Bai Yuexia, there were only a few dozen people. Excluding research and development costs and other expenses, the annual salary of an ordinary employee ranged from 100 to 1,000 coins. Zhang Ping and the others, needless to say, had an annual salary of 10,000 coins. They were filthy rich. What was the concept of Wangguan? It was equivalent to an annual salary of 7 million. The basic salary of Qiguan Rang and the others was barely $1 million. If they included the annual bonuses and rewards, they could barely compete with Zhang Ping and the others. In the past, he used to feel a little jealous. Unfortunately, this part of the money came from the Lord's private treasury, so Qiguan Rang could not say anything. Looking at it now, it didn't seem like much. If spending money could allow technology to reach the level that the Lord had mentioned, he would be willing to spend his entire fortune on it. He didn't care about money. Instead, he began to feel sorry for the Mo family, which had been suppressed to the point of fragmentation during the chaotic times of the 16 kingdoms. Almost all of the Mahist elites died in that generation. They either lost their lineage or lived in seclusion. Jiang Pingji had only managed to recruit a few new members of the Mo family after years of recruitment. If only I could. Qiguan Rang was interrupted by Jiang Pingji before he could finish his sentence. It's impossible in the next few thousand years, let alone in this lifetime. It was useless even if technology advanced, as the entire social structure could not adapt at all. Jiang Pingji told Qiguan Rang about the situation of her era in detail. One person can cultivate such a large area of farmland in Dongqing. Can the people nowadays do that? Qiguan Rang shook his head. He could not imagine how a person could achieve this. It was almost impossible. If you take too big a step, you'll easily injure yourself, Jiang Pingji said. Even with such advanced technology, how many people know how to use it? They learned how to use it, but could they learn how to make it? Even if they learned how to make it, could their thoughts keep up with the changes? Only a long period of time could shape such a world. Even for me, I can only guide people to avoid a few hundred years of detours. The future still depends on the next generation. Pulling a sapling to help it grow is not feasible. I alone cannot contend against the entire era. What I can do is to pave the way and guide the next generation. The heavens are blind. How can they be so unfair to the Lord? Qiguan Rang was silent for a long time after listening. He sighed and said, 100 years is too short. Jiang Pingji smiled. She did not look regretful at all. Looking at Qiguan Rang's reaction, she felt that the background music of "Borrow 500 Years from the Heavens" should be played to fit the occasion. In her previous life, a small number of people could indeed reach a lifespan of 500 years. Most people's average lifespan was about 250 years. In that case, Zixiao's actions are all in accordance with the Lord's wishes? Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "He's helping me. Isn't it cute to be an unknown man behind a successful woman?" Qiguan Rang was speechless. After a while, he asked a question that was extremely coquettish. Was Zixiao a woman in his previous life? Jiang Pingji laughed and said, "Although Zixiao is beautiful, how does his words and actions have the charm of a woman?" Qiguan Rang asked hesitantly, "Will men be so popular in the future?" Jiang Pingji was speechless. Wait, what did he mean by men will be so popular in the future? Did Wenjing define her as a man without even asking? Wenjing, I'm a woman. I was an am. She really did not know what coquettish thoughts these scholars were thinking. Wei Xi suspected that she was a man in her previous life. Qiguan Rang also thought that she was a man. They would not be satisfied until they saw her pull out her crotch that was bigger than theirs, right? Qiguan Rang sucked in a breath of cold air. She did not know what coquettish thoughts he was thinking of. Jiang Pingji did not know that Qiguan Rang had already begun to suspect that the future world was returning from a patriarchal society to a matriarchal society. The evidence was as follows. Look at how hot the Lord is. Look at how hot Wei Xi is. Isn't it obvious who is inside and who is outside? No wonder the Lord strongly supports women. It is also for the future. Qiguan Rang waved the fan in his hand. He needed a gust of cold wind to cool down his brain. Originally, he had plans to train his daughter, Qiguan Jinghui. Now that he thought about it, Qiguan Rang felt that he still needed a dozen more daughters. If someone else said these words, Qiguan Rang would only think that they were daydreaming. However, the person who said these words was the Lord, someone whom Qiguan Rang had never doubted. Her various actions in the past also indirectly confirmed the truth of these words. Qiguan Rang naturally believed her. He also looked forward to the world she spoke of. Although he could not see the grand future, he was willing to be a brick to build the cornerstone. It took Qiguan Rang a long time to calm his mind. He asked, "Which aspects does the Lord plan to start from?" Jiang Pingji said, "Roughly 2 points." "Only 2 points. Is it too little?" Qiguan Rang strained his ears and listened carefully. Jiang Pingji said, "One is technology, and the other is law. Encouraging invention and creation was a point that must be adhered to in the future." Qiguan Rang expressed that he understood. But why the second point was law? The word law seems simple, but it is actually all-encompassing. Jiang Pingji said seriously, "Wenjing, don't you think that the chaotic times in the past were often related to the collapse of law? The law cannot restrain people from doing what they should do, and it invisibly encourages the expansion of ambition. Because the law is not perfect, loopholes can be exploited. The guilty are therefore not punished as they should be, and the social atmosphere is getting worse. This is a sign that the country will be shaken. I value Wenbin so much because of the law. He is the most suitable candidate. Jiang Pingji and Han Yu didn't plan to start a war right away. Instead, they wanted to test the bottom line step by step. Everyone said that there will be no fish when the water is too clear. But the word law does not tolerate muddy gray areas or dark areas where one cannot see one's fingers. Han Yu assisted Jiang Pingji in formulating the governance plan for Changya, leaving no room for corruption. His style of doing things was evident. He would rather suggest that Jiang Pingji increase everyone's salaries than to deliberately allocate more money for the various levels to take advantage of. Wenbin, Qiguan Rang's eyes darkened. Since ancient times, those who advocated for reform never ended up well. Not to mention that Han Yu's revised law would likely harm the interests of many people. I will protect him and so will you. Qiguan Rang nodded solemnly. Of course he would. If Han Yu was really shouldering such a heavy responsibility, Qiguan Rang would support him to the end, even if Han Yu was harming his own interests. P.S. Follow the WeChat official account, Limiox's 666. Chapter 1357. No matter what kind of changes Jiang Pingji had brought to this era, such changes needed time to ferment and spread. As time went by, new ideas could slowly replace the old ones that people were used to. It would take decades, or even decades for it to break out. At present, the old ways of thinking were still dominant. In people's old ways of thinking, men were in charge of external affairs, making money and socializing, while women were in charge of maintaining the family, taking care of children and supporting parents. It seemed that the division of labor was clear, but in fact, it limited women's activities and horizons, making the idea that men were superior to women even more deeply rooted. Even the noble ladies of prominent families couldn't live without the inner chamber, their husbands, elders, and children. In addition to these projects, there was also the so-called wife diplomacy. The noble ladies had to help their husbands expand and consolidate their connections in foreign activities. Before the rise of Wanzhou, there were not many ministers under Jiang Pingji's command. Half of them were single people and the Dink clan. After the rise of Wanzhou, the Jinling court recruited a large number of middle-level talents for Jiang Pingji. Most of them were married. When their husbands were sent to fight or manage the local economy, the wives stayed in Wanzhou. As time went by, they also felt a little irritated and gradually began to interact with each other. The size of these wives' bosom circle depended on the status and relationship of their husbands in the officialdom. Their husbands had a good relationship. The wives had a good relationship. If their husbands had a high status, the wives' bosom circle would be larger. Even if they weren't on good terms before, they would still interact more. Eventually, they would become familiar with each other. Before Jiang Pingji attacked Huang Song, the wives had begun to interact with each other. When she returned from the war, all the tea parties were in full bloom. The tea parties were a battlefield for the wives to display their diplomatic skills. They all knew who to build a good relationship with and who to alienate. Han Yu's wife was the noblewoman with the highest status among them. Naturally, she had the best way of winning over the wives. Although she looked down on these poor women and despised them for being vulgar and stupid, she didn't show it on the surface. Her tea parties were also the best and most thoughtful in the circle of the noble ladies in Wanzhou, which Madame wouldn't envy her. Outsiders didn't know that the relationship between her and Han Yu was at its lowest point. Looking at her exquisite and elegant life, they naturally envied the deep love between the husband and wife. Madame Han enjoyed the feeling of being surrounded by stars. It made her feel like she had returned to the past. Back when she was in Zhe County, her tea party was also unattended. Madames of low status and humble birth were not even qualified to receive an invitation from her. But now, she had to put up with a group of uncultured and uncultured women attending her tea party. Not only that, but this group of coarse women, who only knew how to drink like a pig, also liked to complain about their husbands at tea parties and talk about their sufferings. As Jiang Pingji climbed higher and higher, their bitterness increased. Her husband's career was prosperous, and his status rose. Almost every household had one or two beautiful concubines. Beautiful concubines threatened their status as legal wives, and some of them were pregnant, almost standing on their heads to piss and defecate. All the madams seemed to have found a common topic, and chatted endlessly. Madame Han was disgusted. Such a vulgar woman. It was no wonder that her husband disliked her because of her old age. Which man would like such a shameless woman? Last night, that little bitch kept saying that she had a stomachache. It was obvious that she was greedy and ate the wrong food, but she urged others to accuse me of wanting to hurt her child. What was the point of doing that? She was just a concubine who was not worthy to be seen in public. She really thought she was someone important. She said that she did not care, but the handkerchief in her hand was almost broken by her, and her eyes were red. This is not bad. The one who lives in Chang and Lane is really miserable. Another madam sighed and said, her mother-in-law doesn't like her, and her husband doesn't like her either. It seems that they want to help the concubine get promoted, and demote her to a concubine, and give up her position. She refused, and I heard that she was slapped by her mother-in-law in front of all the servants in the mansion. Her face was swollen. Last night was too noisy, and I am afraid that it has spread. These madams lived a boring life. To relieve their loneliness, tea parties were naturally a good way to kill time. They were all regular customers of tea parties, so they were familiar with each other. They knew who the madam in Chang and Lane was as soon as they heard it. They could not help but sigh and say that she was pitiful. Madame Hanyu was even more annoyed when she heard the gossip. Didn't these stupid women know that one should not wash one's dirty linen in public? They casually talked about the scandals of the inner mansion everywhere. They deserved to be disliked by their husbands. Madame Han was about to drink a cup of tea to calm down, when she heard the voice of a strange woman. The woman's voice was not as clear as an oriole's. Instead, it was a little rough and hoarse like a man. How could it be a woman? She said, such a man, it is better to abandon him. The madams who heard the voice looked in the direction of the voice, and saw a woman who was dressed very plainly in the corner. Her clothes were not bright either. If she was not sitting in the middle of the table, others would think that she was a wet nurse who served people. How can you say that? The woman said. Did I say something wrong? A man who has a change of heart not only spoils his concubine, but also lets her do whatever she wants, filling the house with evil. What can such a man do in this life? It is better to abandon him early and find a smart man. The madams blushed when they heard that. Although they complained, they had never thought of divorcing. Besides, that was their husband. It was not the turn of a minor official's wife to criticize them. Someone said, what an impudent shrew. I just saw that this woman's right foot is sick. Another madam who was sitting next to the woman said coldly, one of the 7 diseases of a woman is a bad disease. Madam, instead of talking nonsense here and disturbing the peace of other people's houses, it is better to think of a way to avoid becoming a lowly wife. This was a relatively polite way of saying it. Some people even questioned the woman's identity. She really did not look like a noble lady. Even if she was someone's wife, she would be a minor official. How could a minor official's wife be qualified to attend a tea party of this level? Although Han Yu's wife was a bit pretentious, her memory and ability were still outstanding among the noble ladies. Even if there were more than 100 guests, she could accurately call out their identities and chat warmly with them. She was the one who ordered people to prepare the invitations for the tea party. Naturally, she would not invite an unknown minor official's wife. She looked at the woman carefully, trying to match her with the invitation she had sent out. Madame Han's tea party was the most famous in the circle of noble ladies in Wanzhou. She was also Han Yu's wife. Of course, the womenfolk of Fengjin and the others couldn't be omitted from the invitation. However, many of the womenfolk declined. The only woman who replied was Lieutenant Dian Yan's wife. Could it be? Before Madame Han could speak to smooth things over, Dian Yan's wife was not angry. Instead, she laughed and said clearly, you don't have to worry about this. There has never been a lowly wife in the family, only a lowly husband. If he does anything disloyal, he will naturally report to the Lord and order a divorce. The madam still wanted to laugh. What lowly husband? What kind of phrase was that? P.S. Follow the official WeChat account. Limiox is 666. You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.